Okay, everybody, welcome to the call to order of the, what is this, the 12th, November 12th closed session of the Board of Directors of the Kensington Police Protection and Community Services District. It's a little after 6:30. My name is Len Welsh. I'm the Board President. This time I'll take roll call. Director Cordova? Here. Director Gillette? Here. Director Sheriff-Watt? Here. Director Toombs? Here. So we have a full board today. Would I see two members of the public here? Would either of you like to comment?
Two mics. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay, good. Jan Burson was unable to attend tonight. He has sent all the board members a letter, which I've been asked to read into the record. The reason I'm doing it at this session is because it may have pertinence to what's happening at the closed session, although of course I really don't know what exactly is going to be done there. So, dear KPPCSD board, the last that I recall, Mr. Toombs' agenda for the ad hoc committee to report out on the question of whether the COP position should be separate from the GM position had the report coming just prior to the November 2016 election. I do not know if this has been revised. This important question must be addressed sooner without delay. According to the interim COP GM contract posted online on the website.
Could I just for a second stop you here? Are you going to want to read this again at the open session?
I wasn't really thinking of it.
Okay.
The question is this really relevant?
It's not really relevant to what we're doing today in closed session. It might be in
well, in
open
that case,
session.
why don't I just stop here and read it at the other one. There'll be more public here too, I hope.
I mean, I'm slitting my own throat, but in fairness, I think probably that's when you should make your comment.
Okay, sounds good to me. Thank you.
I think if that's it, we will adjourn at this time and go into closed session. See you at 7:30.
That was a loud laugh from my listener.
Why don't we all get seated and get started?
We're starting the meeting.
Good evening and welcome to the November 12th regular meeting of the Board of Directors of the Kensington Police Protection and Community Services District. My name is Len Welsh. I'm the Board President. At this time I'll take roll call. Director Cordova?
Here.
Director Gillette?
Here.
Director Sheriff-Watt?
Here.
Director Toombs?
Here.
We're all here. So what I'm going to do first is report out on closed session. First, I'd like to note we had two topics here. We had 2A and B. We reversed the order. We did B first, the Conference of Labor Negotiators, and we actually started that session with Chief General Manager Hart present, but I'm sorry, can you hear me now? Better? We started that session with Chief General Manager Hart present, but decided that
Do we need can you drink?
I just drink water.
it's strong stuff, anyway, we decided out of abundance of caution that the general manager should leave during those negotiations because there might be some perceived impropriety. So if anybody was wondering why he left at that point and later went back in, we finished item B and then we went to A. We took them out of order and he joined us for item A. So as to item B, the report out is that we gave guidance to our negotiators and they're going to go back to the table. On item A, no action was taken. At this time, if anybody from the general public would like to comment on a matter that's not on the agenda, please feel free to get up and say your piece.
Chris Deppy, Franciscan Way, and I should make clear, I'm, as you know, a member of the ad hoc committee, but I'm here as a private citizen, so my comments don't reflect necessarily the opinion of the committee.
Are you commenting on a committee matter? Because we have that on the agenda later. Okay.
Unless is on the agenda the ordinance to ask for a vote on contracting out. Is that on the agenda?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear
The
that.
ordinance that was deemed to be illegal last meeting.
That's what you want to comment on?
Yes.
No, yeah, that's not on the agenda. Go ahead.
Great, okay. And I think it was noted that it shouldn't really affect, again, and this is me, not the committee talking, that it shouldn't affect the committee's work, but we're not doing an academic exercise. Hopefully what we're doing is going to be acted on by the board, and it seems a little strange to have one of their options being treated differently than the rest. So it seems also strange that there's it's been ruled to be illegal. So my preference would be to rescind the ordinance, just make everything clear and equal for whatever the committee comes up with. You can act on it or not act on it. But right now, one of the options has a different post-finding treatment than the rest. And it seems not very logical. Does that make sense?
Well, actually, I think every single one of those options is going to involve a lot of thought about how to make, once options are taken by the board, there will be lots of hoops to jump through, depending on what the options are. So in that sense, I don't think there's anything different.
So is it an ordinance about not, say, merging with the fire board without voting out?
I'm sorry, what?
Do you have an ordinance that says you can't merge with the fire board without a vote of the public?
Yes, so?
Do you have that?
We don't have an ordinance. There
Right,
was a vote
exactly.
taken on that
You don't have an
issue.
ordinance to say you can't split the GM composition without a vote of the public, right? But you do have an ordinance, even though it's ruled illegal, that says you can't contract out without a vote of the public. And that's what the difference is.
Well, okay, fine, that's your opinion, but
Exactly, it's my
we're gonna
opinion.
have hurdles with every single issue that you come up with and present to us. They're going to be unique to each issue. So that's my response to that.
And so you don't think having an illegal ordinance is a problem?
I don't see it as a problem now. I think it's premature to discuss it, frankly. I think the time for discussion will be when we get options presented to us from the committee and we decide where we want to go. Then we'll have to take up that issue, how to get it done.
How does the rest of the board feel about that?
So, before we have
think-
answer that question, I would like to remind the board, as your general manager, that this section is for the public to address the board, and the board not engage in any kind of conversation that would be perceived as making a decision that is not on the agenda. So,
Okay.
if Mr. Deppie would like to make a statement, the board can take that statement and then move on to the next one, but without having any kind of deliberation. And I say that primarily just to make sure we stay out of the hot water with the attorney, but also to make sure we're not talking about a decision that is not listed on the agenda and was prior agendized.
Sure, I
Well,
understand.
and you're right. The purpose of this is not to have a conversation.
Right.
You've made your comments.
Okay,
so
thank you.
Thank you.
Katya Deniergard. Actually, I'd like to speak to the same...
Katya, I'm sorry, your voice is so soft. You need to get closer to that mic.
Okay, so I have come with a series of questions concerning the 2009 Doro ordinance, or initiative petition ordinance, whatever it's called. One is there was a lot of confusion after your critique of it that was presented last month. And so I'd like it clarified that it's still a standing law. You said that, in summary, for the reasons discussed in this opinion, a court would likely conclude that the initiative measure is invalid and may not be enforced. However, it is still a law, isn't that right? Mr. Riddle, isn't it still a law?
And again, this
It's
is
on the
this
books?
is- Unless the board directs me to, at an agendized item to get into this more, and it may well be the case that that happens at some point. This is really not a question and answer for the attorney from the public. I don't mean any disrespect. It's just that this, it is for public comment. You're free to ask whatever questions you want, but it's not on the agenda. It may well be that your questions will lead to the board wanting to put an item on the agenda to clarify some of these issues, and for that reason, your questions, may be important to the board, but it's not really appropriate for me to be addressing those tonight. There's no agenda item that suggests that, so.
So consider it a question and consider it a request to make it an agenda item so that we could all understand this clearly, that it is still standing law, and that, in fact, we, the board and the district, are still exposed to litigation into the indefinite future. And a lot of people have discussed a lot of different scenarios of how litigation could occur. But it could occur any time. And so it's still a formidable barrier to contracting out for police services. This ordinance could be litigated, as I said, at any time. Say if the board wanted to put something on the ballot, or if the board wanted to contract out for police services, it could provoke litigation. And as we all know from the writ petition, for example, it could take 2 or 3 years of litigation to settle the matter. And I'm sure other people went to attorneys and talked about this, and the attorney I spoke with suggested that the board could do one of two things could occur to sort of lay down the threat of this ordinance. One is that the board could go to court and start a process to repeal or void it. And I don't have the exact technical words for that, but you know what I mean. And the other one is a citizen could take the ordinance to court. And neither of those need be expensive for the district. It could, compared to what we, spend, a lot of money on other things, it doesn't have to be a huge amount of money to settle this. And I would like to see it settled. I would like to see this ordinance laid to rest so it's not a barrier to whatever Kensington wants to do in the future. And not just in the coming months and few years, but indefinitely into the future. And my second set of questions,
I just want
shorter.
to ask you to try to keep your comment to 5 minutes if you can, please.
Okay, I don't know what time it is.
Well, you're about into 4 minutes right now. so-
Okay. Well, very quickly, I wanted to ask Director Cordova. There was a number of statements that was put online on your behalf, supposedly from you. One is a statement by you saying, citing credible threats to personal safety, the FBI has advised me to temporarily relocate from Kensington, where I have resided for over 15 years. And then also the FBI has offered to
Liaison.
that isn't what's there, but yes, with the
Liaise
county,
is the word.
with the county register and the Secretaries of State office to ensure I can fulfill my duties as a public office holder while displaced. So my question is, did they do that? Did you leave Kensington, and did they sort of fix it for you to?
And I'm sorry, but I
do-
want to reiterate what the chief said and what our attorney said, which is that this is not a question
Well,
and answer session.
she could answer if she wanted to, is that
Yes.
correct?
I spent 5 days out of the district. I ran a 200-mile race that I do every year from San Francisco to Napa with 12 of my high school classmates, including an off-duty police officer. And I spent 4 days, actually 3 days in the Sierras. So I was only gone from the district for 5 days.
Thank you. And lastly, I wanted to ask the ad hoc committee to please start generating data, gathering information. I understand that it's, people are sort of discussing things, and what I really hoped the ad hoc committee would do is, gather that data and do the research. So please do that. Thank you.
Thank you for the comments. Gotta get close, gotta get close, sorry. You have a soft voice, too.
I wish to make a comment about the omission of the term interim from the job description that you have. And last June, an article written for the Outlook by board members Welsh and Toombs commended board members Gillette and Sherris Watt for their terrific job managing the selection of candidates for an interim general manager of police and interim general manager and police. Similarly, an article in the July-August edition of the Outlook written by board member Sherris Watt states that the board selected Kevin Hart to fill the position of interim general manager, chief of police. On August 14th, the employment agreement for the interim general manager, chief of police was signed. Mr. Welsh signed on behalf of the Kensington Police Protection Community Service District Board of Directors, and Mr. Hart signed under the title Interim General Manager, Chief of Police. Why then has Mr. Hart dropped the term interim? Mr. Hart identifies himself as Kevin E. Hart, Chief of Police, or Kevin E. Hart, General Manager, without the term interim. Omitting interim is misleading because it conveys the impression that the job has become permanent. It appears that on his own, Mr. Hart has chosen to drop any reference to the interim nature of his employment, and the community is experiencing what might be called job or tenure creep. It's certainly reasonable to expect that anyone who serves in an official capacity and who is in a position to use official letterhead should be expected to accurately identify his or her rank and status of employment. Such accuracy on a public document is the most basic kind of good public information. I have 3 communications to illustrate my point about accurate identification of an employment status. One example comes from the business sector. It's from East Bay Regional Data, an organization that maintains data for Bay Area real estate agents. The writer identifies himself as Bob Bemis, Interim Chief CEO, East Bay Regional Data. Another example comes from academia. Correspondence from the mathematics department at UC is signed Craig Evans, Interim Chair Mathematics. The third example can be found in the June 2015 edition of the Kensington Outlook, where Alma Key identifies herself as Interim Managing Editor. It's not my intention to be disrespectful to Mr. Hart. Really, it is not. But I wish to remind him that the KPPCSD board was very clear about the interim status of his position when his appointment was announced. I believe the KPPC board has 2 choices in this matter. It can instruct its employee to accurately self-identify when acting in his official capacity, or it needs to explain to the community any assumptions about the terms and conditions of Mr. Hart's employment that have changed since he was appointed Interim General Manager / Chief of Police. I have a copy of this for Lynn and for each of the board members, and it also includes the correspondences that I have referenced.
Thank you for the comment.
Gloria Morrison, district resident. I'm asking questions, but really they are hypothetical sort of things. I just wanted to say, you know, the 30 days or so since our last mishap involving police officers are pretty much coming to an end, and a lot of us are curious as to how this matter will be decided and what the result will be. I know that the chief has reminded us about the police officers, what am I trying to say? What was it? Please remind me again. Code, yeah, the code of, of conduct. But at the same time, with these things going on, with the first mishap involving police officers, the board, and I hate to say it, the general manager may start losing the confidence of the community, especially when we see one officer in the middle of several different, shall we say, mishaps. I noticed that you are having other police agencies investigate this situation, and one is the Richmond Police. However, as we all know, the chief of police in Richmond, Chris Magnus, is looking for a new job, or at least he's applying for other jobs. I wonder how much time he and the Richmond police force have to put into an investigation for a separate outside police force. Anyway, I am waiting for a result of all of these investigations that will be not only legal but fair to everyone, and which will restore the confidence of the community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Jim Watt. This is going to sound like following up here with Celia's comments, but I saw in the agenda tonight that there was, I guess, discussion in closed-door session about performance evaluation on the chief. It reminded me that I wanted to take another look at the interim general manager chief of police employment agreement that you people signed. And I want to, because I live by the documentation process and the work that I do, that under the terms of that agreement, you had some obligations which, to the best of my knowledge, have never been performed. So I wanted to read those to you. They occur under number 6B of the interim general manager's agreement. And it goes as follows. After the district determines its goals and objectives, the board and HART shall further define the goals and performance objectives necessary for the proper operation of the KPPCSD. The board and HART shall further establish a relative priority among the various goals and objectives. The goals and objectives should be reduced to writing and should be attainable within the time and budgetary resources provided. To the best of my knowledge, I have certainly never seen or heard of any goals and objectives, and I believe that under the terms of this contract, that you were to establish those goals, review them with HART, and then evaluate HART based on his performance in obtaining those goals and objectives. So based on that, I would encourage you to do that, since it was a condition of his employment. I also have a comment, and I addressed this earlier, about the fact that Mr. Hart serves, as we know, as a council member in Dublin. And 1B of the interim general manager's employment agreement reads as follows. Hart further agrees to focus his full professional time, ability, and attention to district business during the term of the agreement. Consequently, Hart hereby agrees not to engage in any other business pursuits whatsoever, directly or indirectly, or render any services of a business, commercial, or professional nature to any other person or organization for compensation without the prior written consent of the district. We know that Mr. Hart is compensated for his service there, but my primary concern is this. We certainly, I think, realize the tremendous amount of work that Mr. Hart has here in this district. And we also know, as you do as board members, the amount of time that it takes for you to devote to the tasks that you're confronted with. The same is true for a city council member. If in fact we have a serious emergency, say a severe earthquake, where is Mr. Hart going to devote his attention? Is he going to devote it to helping out here in Kensington or handling all the issues that could confront him as a council member in Dublin? I think that we need to have a clear understanding about why the board apparently feels there is no conflict of interest here. Thank you very much.
A. Stevensdale. The minutes of the September meeting incorrectly stated that I said in 2013-14 the fire district received $3.2 million in ad valorem taxes and KPPCSD received $2.5 million. These values are for total taxes and include special taxes. This is just for clarification. Don't bother to amend the minutes. It's not really worth it. Fortunately, the full text of my comment and the data I use can be found on pages 36 and 37 of the October packet. The take-home lesson was that for the average Kensington property owner, the out-of-pocket cost for KPP CSD's directed services was $1,800 for that year. That for KFPD was $1,500. If you find that I made a mistake, misinterpreted the data, please let me know and I will correct it.
Thank you. Next.
Hi. Okay. My question is, the chief is now into 6 months of his interim term, and wouldn't it be wise for the board to begin discussion pertaining to separating the GM-COP position and including the public and PLG? I raise this because it has been said here and on Nextdoor that we need to wait for the ad hoc committee. Well, the reality is the ad hoc is taking a longer time to become a productive committee and most likely won't have any findings in the near term in spite of their good intentions. I believe that the due process breaches are a major are a major concern and a threat to the town that I believe the board really has no choice but to step over the process, the ad hoc process, and engage in discussion to remedy the situation. You may say that there are 2 investigations going on now and that due process is being done, but I and others ask, is that the best way to manage a town, by crisis management, rather than proactively having a process in place that is legal and fair? I would like to suggest, as it has been suggested, at minimum, 8 times before at board meetings, April 2009, October 2010, July 2011, December 2012, January 2013, February 2013, February 2015, April 2015, and now November 12th, 2015, that the board put this on the agenda and begin preliminary discussions of this long overdue topic. We are the only small town with a combined position in the area. Moraga, Hercules, Tiburon, Fairfax, I could go on and on, all have 2 positions. We are unable to provide due process to citizens and employees due to a clear, unintended conflict of interest, as we have been seen recently with our board member and repeatedly in the past. Escobar and others come to mind. By discussing this at board meetings over time, we have the benefit of asking the public law group questions pertaining to liability, costs of potential litigation again, discussions of scenarios with and without a split position. We have a ticking time bomb that is a threat to the board and ultimately to our financial stability. If the majority board does not see that now, after all that has occurred, and will potentially occur, then I really don't know what will spur you on to take this seriously, other than another crisis. And that's all I have to say.
Come on up.
Good evening. I have a brief announcement for the board and all the attendees. Is that okay?
Yes, please,
Okay.
go ahead.
My name is Peter Liddell with the Kensington Public Safety Council, and I just want to announce an event we're having here on Saturday. The National Weather Service is predicting a wet and warm winter, which means the precipitation we get, if we get it, will be mostly rain, so it will come down fast. And there is a possibility of local flooding and mudslides. So to that end, we thought it'd be interesting to have a demonstration of sandbagging and other preventive measures people can take to help to protect their homes. So Saturday at 10 a.m., Michael Bond from the El Cerrito Kensington Fire Department will demonstrate the use of sandbags and how to protect your home and property. We'll have someone from East Bay Mud here to tell us about their plans for El Nino and how that might affect Kensington's water infrastructure. We'll have someone from Stige come and talk to us about the drains and if there's any concerns that we should have about their ability to handle a lot of rain in a short time. And lastly, kind of the other side of it all, we'll have Cheryl Miller from the Diablo Fire Safe Council, and she'll explain why we should still be thinking about wildfire prevention even if we're expecting a lot of rain. The thing is, we have still a lot of dead vegetation around. It might be close to your house, and along with providing or preparing for wet weather, you should also be preparing for wildfires still. So anyway, again, it's 10 o'clock Saturday morning. We hope you can all make it.
Peter, how long do you expect the meeting to go?
An hour to an hour and a half. I think it should be done by then.
10 o'clock.
10 a.m.
10 a.m. this Saturday. Saturday is going to be a busy day here.
And where is it going to be at, in this building?
Okay, you just yell it out. What do you want me to say? Yes. She'll also be telling Cheryl Miller from Diablo Fire Safe Council will be telling us about $5,000 grants that may be available for homeowners for the removal of hazardous vegetation. It's a good motivator. Yes, it's here. And we have the sandbags staged out back, so we're ready to go. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I was doing research for one of the later items, and it's pretty tough researching scanned PDFs on the board website. Is it possible to put up actual textual PDFs for the agendas and the minutes?
We're working on that, aren't we?
Yes,
Steve?
we are. Yeah, the problem with putting on well, it's working with our webmaster, it's working with our upload. It is on my list of, very close to the top of the list of trying to rectify.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Peter Conrad. Could I request or make a suggestion that item D under new business be moved up the calendar so that Mr. Wallace isn't kept here too late, or
I'm
me?
going to make that request, yes. I promise.
Okay. Item, where is that now? I'm sorry.
Item 8B.
Oh, way at the end. Yeah, okay, so,
If we want to do consent calendar, I don't know what else we need.
yeah, let's do consent calendar, and then we'll move right to that item. So, with public comment finished, would any of the board members like to make a comment?
Yes, I will.
Oh, I'm sorry, director's comments?
Yes.
Oh, thank you.
So Monday, the Park Building Committee met for the 8th time, I think, here, and we had the pleasure of the gentleman you'll meet tonight, our seismic engineer, Greg Wallace, who presented and answered questions from the committee about his seismic study. We also discussed the completed, well, we mentioned that we have completed an ADA study on the building And we are hopeful that the architect, Gilda Puente Peters, will be able to come in December and discuss this. And luckily, it's mostly photographs, so if anybody wants to read, this will be going up on the website if it, or yes, that's right. Or if you need a doorstop, we can get you a copy. So anyway, we're moving along, and you're welcome to attend. The next meeting will be next Tuesday evening, and then we'll meet again in December 16th. So,
Director Shearswatt, I'm not sure if the board knows, but this is going to dovetail into another item, but I'll just quickly state that the library has a spot, a designated area for these types of documents to just exist.
Wonderful.
And you can put a copy there in the library and direct anyone to the library, save you on copying.
We shall do that.
You can find your KMAC applications with limited drawings at the library also, which is good to know.
Anything else, Rochelle?
Just that I think, well, the staff will bring up the toy drive and the other things that are going on, so I think that's all for now.
Okay, go ahead, Rochelle.
Very quickly, we had a Finance Committee meeting in October, and there were a couple of things I just wanted to alert you all to. Can you all hear me okay? I'm sorry, I have a very sore throat. Doing okay, thank you. We normally have an October annual evaluation from CalPERS. It's being delayed because of delays in implementation of GASB 68, which is an accounting standard requiring how we account for our pension liabilities. We don't expect to get it till the end of November. There's going to be a discussion tonight about planning a 5-year plan. One of the other things we discussed at the Finance Committee, which is being carried over to the next meeting, is starting to peel back the layers of what kind of a reserve policy to put into effect. And there was a discussion under the 5-year plan to include issues about what happens if CalPERS changes its discounting assumptions. Right now they're at 7.5% average yield, that they in effect haven't met that for some time. And then there's some projections we'd like to see perhaps about the kind of yield assumptions that CalPERS is likely to produce rather than what they promise they think they might get. And the fourth thing about the Finance Committee is some discussion about putting in a rational variance report for our monthly finance statements. So that's an update from the Finance Committee.
Thanks for that, Chuck. Stole some of my thunder. Rochelle? Vanessa, sorry.
Okay. Yes, let's see here. As I mentioned, for the month of October, I did take some time away, 5 nights away, which was quite lovely, and I look forward to spending the holidays with my parents in Orange County. I'm sure that's appropriate and acceptable to everyone. I had the opportunity to complete my AB 123 certification. It was due December 5th, 2015, so I'm ahead of the game there. I was the last board member to complete that, admittedly, but I have done it with the Attorney General's website, which was free, which is great. I also had the opportunity this month to discuss some traffic issues with residents around the Calusa Circle area as well as Franciscan Way, and I will go into that more deeply when that item comes up tonight. That's it.
Very good. Pat?
I'm glad to be back. I was on vacation in September, and then my niece got married in October, so I missed those 2 meetings, and I apologize for that, but it's nice to be back and nice to see so many people here in the audience. So that's all I have to say.
Nice to have you back. I just have a couple of things. Peter mentioned the beginning of the festivities this Saturday at 10 o'clock. There are 2 other events going on here at 2 o'clock at the library. It's their 50th anniversary. They're having a little celebration. They plan to have live music, face painting, refreshments, and activities for kids. So that's at 2 o'clock. Katie, how long does that go for? 4? 2 to 4? And from 5:30 to 8 p.m. Saturday at the Public Safety Building, the fire station, the KFPD, the fire district, will be conducting a pasta feed and toy drive. So you get a nice big plate of pasta, and you're asked to either make a $5 donation or bring a toy for a kid. And if you do bring a toy, as difficult as it may be, you have to refrain from bringing a stuffed animal. Those are not in favor these days, I guess, for, I don't know what the reason is, maybe sanitation, or toy weapons of any kind. They have to be unwrapped. So that's a big day, Saturday.
President Welsh, can I mention something about
You
the
certainly
library
may.
event? Many of you know, but maybe perhaps some of you don't know, that our county library, as small and modest as it is, has the highest per capita circulation of any county library in Contra Costa County.
Cool. Okay.
That's a big deal, actually. It is, considering our size.
Okay, staff.
So we just have a few items that is in addition to the written document, so I don't want to repeat what's already been written to everyone to review. I did want to highlight, though, that we are continuing to try to work with some potential contractors to upgrade the sound system here. We've looked at a couple different options, two additional items that of interest that the board and the community may appreciate, and that is that there's a loop system that we're trying to examine. That loop system will be something, I just to describe it, would be a loop within this building here where it would amplify those that have a hearing aid. And I think that may be something that we may want to look at. It is also would meet ADA compliance issues, so I want to try to look at that issue. In addition to that, the KIC, I met with the KIC and they expressed a lot of enthusiasm and interest to potentially partnering with the board here for purposes of sharing the sound system. So between those two, it may add additional opportunities for us to partner, but also I may need to come back based on getting final cost to have a sound system and a video capability system where it does not have to be staffed by a police officer, for one, and two, that will take care of our potential long-term problems of our audio. So it's not going as fast as what I wanted to go to, but we are expanding on that issue, and I just hope that we can, the board and the community will have patience. I do have two microphones up there tonight, only because I want to try to use the podium itself as an additional magnifying for the audio to try to enhance everyone's hearing capabilities in this room. The acoustics in the room is not the best, obviously, and we're going to get a report on the seismic, as everyone knows, here shortly. But I did want to make sure that everyone knows that I am working on that piece of it and trying to move forward on as quickly as possible. The tree pruning, I put in the report that it is done. The commercial part of it was done. We continuously have a group of citizens that prune the bushes and trees. I didn't want to not include them in the discussion, but the commercial work that needed to be done, the heavy lifting, for lack of better words, has been completed as we move towards the weather that we're having now. The Citizen Academy continues. It meets on Wednesdays. It's progressing very nicely. I think it's a good experience for members of the community. I think that the members that have attended, I think we have some in the audience, would hopefully say that they're learning something about it and it's worth their time, which is important. It's already mentioned about the toy drive. We have a barrel in the lobby of the police and fire station. Please come in there and you can drop off, during business hours, you can drop off an unwrapped toy, as mentioned by the board president. And then lastly, in August when I was sworn in, the day after I was sworn in, I pledged and did a press release relative to an incident that happened early in 2014, where I am committed to do an audit and review of that incident, that investigation, I should say. The audit and review has been completed by an outside independent agency, and I'm working with our legal representative to try to come up with how I can release as much information to the community in order to move towards rebuilding the trust that I'm trying to bring back into the community. from the police department. So that has been completed, so I'm hopefully that'll be out within the next 2 to 3 weeks at the most, hopefully sooner, but I just don't know. I've got to be very careful how I phrase that based on employees' rights. So, and I think that Randy wanted to make a comment.
Could I just ask, before you pass it over to Randy, the comment was made earlier expressing concern over the choice of the Richmond police chief to conduct the independent investigation, and can we count on that being done in a timely fashion given the possibility that he may seek a job somewhere else?
I appreciate the comments that were said. However, the chief of police is only one entity. There's a lieutenant from Richmond PD that's assigned to internal affairs that is conducting that investigation, and I don't think the change of the chiefs, if that were to occur, would have any impact on the timing. That particular investigation, I'm hoping to be wrapped up in mid, but that's progressing as well.
Thank you.
So I normally don't make a report. I was informed that there was a question that had arisen in the community that I just wanted to briefly address about the relative role of the board and the general manager in terms of the disciplinary process. It's an issue I looked at, and under the government code, provisions that deal with community service districts, it makes clear that that responsibility lies with the general manager. And again, my understanding was there was some confusion or concern about how that process worked and how those respective roles worked, and I just wanted to clarify that.
All right, thank you. Lynn, did you? Oh,
that concludes the staff comments, unless I have any questions from the board.
What about Lynn? Did she, anything from her? Okay.
Already checked with her.
Any questions from the board? Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it. All right, why don't we jump ahead of the consent calendar and go right to...
We have an update from the ad hoc.
Right, we have an update.
We asked.
Me.
Well, all right.
No, well, it's up to you. I can do it later if you like.
Well, we may have comment in response to what you say, so go ahead.
Well, whatever you choose to. If you want to have Mr. Wallace come up first, that's fine with me. I can stay as late as you need. If you prefer it that way.
How long's your report, do you think?
Well, it's only about 5 minutes or less.
Okay, go for it. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, to begin with, I think we're actually doing quite well, given the fact that we started a little late, and that was partly a scheduling issue, but be that as it may, we've had 3 meetings to date. We'll have a 4th meeting on the 16th, where Mr. Hart will be making a presentation on police services. It will be at the Unitarian Universalist Church, 1 Lawson Road. Again, the 16th, Monday night, starts at 7. It's scheduled for 2 hours. The public is invited. To be very honest, I've been disappointed, and I think the rest of the committee members have been, with regard to public response to attending our meetings. We've probably had no more than 4 people, and the same people each time, which I appreciate their attendance. But I certainly would urge the rest of the public to come out, make comments, and listen to the discussion. We've begun to address the first task that was assigned to us from the process framework, which is the assessment of the current structure of police services. We've created 5 subcommittees to look at the statutory regulatory issues, the financial issues, the services provided, trying to obtain community perception of services, what they feel about them, what they feel is lacking, what could be better. They're happy with it to begin with. And then we're going to have a public educational forum, which was also described in the framework, one of at least 4. That will occur on January 23rd, which is a Saturday, from 10 to 12 here. And we haven't yet decided how we're going to do that logistically. Probably have some speakers, maybe committee members from each of the subcommittees, possibly Mr. Hart as well, to describe in more detailed police services. But more than anything else, we're seeking public input and comments. So it's both an educational forum and a forum for the public to provide their opinions and their comments. We appreciate your graciously giving us 2 hours of Mr. Riddle's time, and we utilize that. And we obtained from that an indication of what Kensington's responsibility as an unincorporated area were to provide police services, and second, what the responsibilities of a community services district is as well for providing police services. We're creating a committee documents web page. It's already up there. Now it's going to be populated both with Mr. Riddle's memo and also with the final process framework. And as we go forward, we'll be providing other documents that hopefully it will at least indicate to the public how we're doing and educate them as we go forward. So, including most likely draft findings, so that we can then bring it to the public for their input before we finalize them. I mentioned the special meeting. The last thing I'd like to ask is that our meetings are 1 week before your meetings, and so there's a timing issue as to getting on your agenda for issues. So just a thought, one would be an open agenda item where we could bring issues such as if we were interested in contracting out at a amount that would be higher than Mr. Hart would be able to do on his own, or if we felt we needed more information from the public law group on issues, or other matters where we would be asking for district services. So the question really comes, should we have an ongoing item on the agenda for that purpose, or is there sufficient time for us to get on your agenda after our meeting, recognizing that it's only a week before your meetings?
I think having it just, for the time being, be a rolling, a repeating agenda item until we get to a point where we don't need it is a good idea.
No, and it can appear on the agenda as a standing report. That's very typical. Well, you're from the Public Health Department, so.
Right.
Yeah.
It would, we can have it there in, sort of generically, but it would be good if there's something specific you want to ask for, it would be good. There is a little bit of time, so just get that information to the chief so he can, add some language if that helps to get across what we're doing.
Certainly. I mean, the idea was we would get it to them as quickly as possible, probably the next day, but we just want to make sure that it would get on the agenda. Okay. So having an ongoing item, and of course you could table it if there's,
right.
no.
Pat, what do you want to say?
So I have a couple of things. One, when we formed this committee, one of the things we asked
Director, can you bring the microphone? Thank you.
When we formed the committee, one of the things we asked people is whether they would have time to work on this and make sure that we could move the agenda along. I've said repeatedly that I'd like to have this done by the spring. And I'm worried that if we're just going to have our first public meeting on January 23rd to discuss the first iteration or first tranche of work that you're doing, that we're not going to get this done. And I really think it's critical to move this thing along. So I'd like to know whether there's what deadline, if any, you're working under and how we're going to get there.
Well, I'll start out with the present task we're doing right now, which is the current services. We're working as best we can under your deadline, even though we're not going to meet it. Your deadline was February. We're hopefully going to have the final report at the end of January or early February. At the same time, I think the committee feels that they would like to do things in parallel, so that we would be moving on items simultaneously. The next full meeting, a regular meeting I should say, will be in December 3rd, a Thursday, and there has been sentiment within the committee to start discussing how we're going to do that as well. So to the degree that we can meet your expectation, I think there is a strong interest within committee members to try to do that.
So would it be reasonable then to expect for the regular December meeting that you'll be able to give us some sort of an outline that shows how you're going to deal with these issues in parallel and attaches deadlines to them?
I won't promise that, but I'll try to make every effort, because there will be that discussion for that meeting, so.
I mean, you know, if you just make an estimate, all you can do is make an estimate. You can't predict the future, but
Okay.
at least if we have a starting, you know, framework to work with, and we know what at least the goal deadlines are, the goal objectives are, then we can get progress reports and see if they're being met or not, and if they're not being met, what can we do about it?
Okay, well, I'll commit to at least having some indication of planning and timing.
May I interrupt and make a comment on that? I think the way we crafted the frame, and I recognize, but you did get your parallel subgroups, so that's, you did get that. So I think that sounds like it's already rolling, and I'd hate to burden the committee with having to come up with a draft document to show and demonstrate how they're going to explore this, because
I'm just looking for expected deadlines, that, you know, like if they're going to
Sure.
have subcommittees on each subject, when do they think, you know, what are the milestones? And
do you find that will?
Well, I think it can be sort of a cursory description, if you will. It's not going to be detailed, and I certainly don't want to commit the committee members to any fixed set of deadlines or expectations by any means, but I think...
Well, I mean, I think there is some concern that, you know, all this work is not going to get done in time, and so the more you can put some detail around when you expect these things to be accomplished, I think, you know, that'll help people to feel like the process is working, or if it's not working, you know, we do something to change it.
Right, and we recognize that, you know, the schedule would take us out to November of 2016. I think, at least from what I'm hearing of other committee members, or at least the majority, they would like to shorten that and see the need to do that. So,
okay.
I guess what I'm saying is that as the board that empowered the committee, I'd like to see the report done in the spring, finished in the spring. And I think that, I mean, I think we've discussed that several times. I just think we have to move it along. And so the framework was exactly that, just a suggestion. But since then, we've had numerous discussions about moving it along and having it done more quickly. And if that means that the committee has to meet more often, then the committee has to meet more often, or you have to figure out how to get it done. I personally only work with deadlines. If I don't have a deadline, I don't work well, but that may not be the way the committee works. I just think we need to get it done sooner than next November.
I hear you.
But I appreciate your candor, and I know it was a slow launch. Can I offer a suggestion about...
We're all open to suggestions.
Okay. I'm wondering, and you can weigh in on this, General Manager Hart. I know Ms. Waltrip maintains an existing email list for constituents who are interested in district news, and I'm wondering if it might be of interest to you or the committee members to simply draft something introducing your work to the greater community that can be emailed to... If you incorporated the link to the next agenda, how is that different from...
I'm sorry, Director, can you clarify what you're asking for?
Sure. I mean, it would be nice if we send only agendas on that link.
And the reason for that is that people were asked if they wanted to receive the agenda. They submitted their names to receive only that. If people want to be receiving other information, perhaps we solicit yet a different list.
Does your current website for the ad hoc committee have an opt-in where someone can leave their email address and get regular updates from you?
Not that way. There is an email address, which is my Gmail account, which they can...
I'm just trying to find a better, you know, I hear your struggle with getting public participation, and I know that's an important part of it, and we want everyone to believe in the research that you present to us by spring. So I'm wondering if it's possible on your website to, you know, solicit email addresses for those who want to keep abreast.
Yeah, we can do that.
You could put a notice there and ask them to email Lynn and say, please include me in the email list for meeting announcements, something like that.
I
That's fine. we can do that.
And just for clarity, there is no separate website.
It's a
I'm
web
sorry,
page.
page.
Yes.
Okay, it's a drop-down menu on our current website. And although the website was rebuilt last year, I'm struggling with trying to make strides in improving the website based on its current platform.
I have one more comment, and that is I did not mean to suggest by anything I said that I don't think you guys are doing a great job, and I know that it's hard since you're all volunteers to make time to do these things. So thank you for everything you guys are doing.
No, I appreciate your
I
comments.
just want it done faster.
And having been to all these meetings when you started discussing the framework, I appreciate, your interest in getting it done sooner than later.
It's a big task. It really is. And being willing to do it is much appreciated.
I'm wondering, Director Cordova asked last month that we have an item on the agenda regarding time for the ad hoc committee with PLG, which we failed to do. So I'm wondering where you are in terms of your hours with the public law group, and if you are hoping for more.
Well, we used the 2 hours that you authorized us. In fact, I believe I sent the memo to each of you. I don't know if you had a chance to.
I'm sorry, I haven't received it.
Okay. It was to the district, your district web address. So
you're within budget.
as far as that's concerned, well, Mr. Riddle could probably answer that better than I can.
Well, let's
But
just
I
have that
believe so.
incorporated in your regular report, that just like you did.
Right. And as I said, we may be interested in getting more time from the public law group. Right now, we haven't anticipated anything in the near term, but that could change as we start.
So let us know after your meeting prior to the next regular meeting. We'll throw it on the agenda, okay?
Right. And that would be the other reason for having the standing item.
Yeah, sandwich it right in there.
And if I could also suggest, Dave, if you want to come by the office tomorrow, I've got some ideas to try to help expedite the process.
Sure. Yeah. And so let me say one other thing too is, it is difficult to find meeting locations because the community center is taken up Mondays and Tuesdays, and so, for example, this last special meeting, because we're having it at the church, and the 16th was the best day for our committee members, and it fit Mr. Hart's schedule. Ideally, we would have it here, but we are taking what we can get, so that's always a problem. And we don't necessarily. I want to avoid having it in one of these small rooms, because if we start getting public interest, which I'd like to see happen, we will need a larger location. That will be here from 10 to noon.
January 23rd meeting.
January 23rd. It'll be a public educational forum. 10 o'clock it'll start. 10 a.m. Yes. Yes.
And is that on your page yet? Your web page?
Not yet.
I don't believe so, no.
No. Let me add one more thing. The Outlook has asked us to provide a monthly column with updates. I created a group of 4 who have put together a column that will go on the November-December Outlook, which will announce that meeting. December, January, I'm sorry. So that will notice that particular meeting.
Okay. Any more board questions or comments?
More?
All right. How about public? Mr. Bergen, did you want to? Remember, you were going to read that letter.
Sure.
Thank you, David.
Okay, my name is David Bergen. How's this? Okay, my name is David Bergen, and I have a letter to the board from Jan Burson, who was unable to come tonight. This was already sent to the board members, and it was actually published on Nextdoor. Dear Board, the last that I recall, Mr. Toombs' agenda for the ad hoc committee to report out on the question of whether the COP position should be separate from the GM position the report coming just prior to the November 2016 election. I do not know if this has been revised. This important question must be addressed sooner without delay. According to the interim COP-GM contract posted online at the KPPCSD website, interim COP-GM's contract, quote, shall be in full force and in effect June 8, 2015, or upon hard passing the district's full hiring process, which includes a background check and all required testing, whichever is later, and March 1st, 2016. Thus, the interim COP-GM's contract expires approximately 100 days from today. The contract goes on to provide, quote, by mutual agreement of the parties, the term of this agreement may be extended until June 1st, 2016. If there is a possibility that the district will have a new permanent COP and or the legally required general manager in as little as 100 days from today, underlined, it seems the board would want to know, as would Mr. Hart, long before the expiration of the next 100 days, whether the community will have two positions, COP and general manager, so that the board knows on what basis to start advertising and begin interviewing candidates for the permanent COP and or general manager positions. My recollection is that Mr. Toombs set a time just before the November 2016 election for the ad hoc committee to report out on this question of separation of positions. In terms of timing, we see that just won't do. A threshold undertaking, it seems to me, is to obtain advice of our legal counsel whether, despite the California government code mandating that a district have a general manager to hire, fire, supervise all district employees, and despite the COP being a district employee, it is legally permissible without creating an impermissible conflict of interest for the employee to be supervised by and accountable to himself in the role of, quote, supervisor, unquote, i.e., general manager. It seems to me that even if legally permissible to combine the two positions, our community's sad history over the past 7 or so years demonstrate that the board is either unwilling or incapable of supervising the COP. And having the COP wearing, the GM hat supervise himself has not proven to be a workable construct. This construct, where the supervisor, quote, unquote, and supervisee, quote, unquote, positions are held by the same person, does not do justice to the system of checks and balances the legislature had in mind in enacting the government code provisions mandating that each district have a general manager to hire, fire, supervise, and discipline all district employees, including the employee who is the COP. Note that there is no legal requirement for each district to have a COP. Unless the establishment of the ad hoc committee as well as the designation of the position of COP/GM as interim, quote unquote, are a sham intended to delay and deceive the community until the November 2016 election, there's a lot of immediate work that needs to be done now to get the legal issues resolved and to assess the will of the community on whether, if legally permissible, the GM and COP positions shall be separate or consolidated. Respectfully submitted for your consideration, A. Jan Person, resident.
And just give credit where credit's due, because I hate when men take all the responsibility for something. I think that it was both Chuck and Vanessa who were involved in creating that document. So we should acknowledge that we had two directors involved.
I remember.
You did not get credit for doing
I do remember that.
Yeah.
Again, I was reading Jan's letter.
I know it wasn't your comment.
And
We do a lot of branding in town, have you noticed?
and I would second almost everything that he has said in here. And unfortunately, he was unable to attend, but he asked that I read this.
Thank you for reading it.
Thank you.
Any other comments from the public? Yeah, on the ad hoc committee. That are on the agenda, yes. We're past that period. We're past the public comment period. All right. If there's no other comment, then let's move up to item 8D under new business, the report from Gregory Wallace about the seismic analysis on the community center.
Can I give a little bit of intro?
Sure, please do.
Several months ago, you'll probably recall that the board approved that the park committee could contract, or the general manager could engage in a contract for a structural analysis of this building. Mr. Wallace has worked hard and diligently and been so wonderfully generous with his time with our committee, and thank you for coming.
Oh, thanks.
Oh, on page 98 is where we begin. And so you'll see a complete...
Correct. New business 8, item D. This is the report, the seismic report on the community center.
Yes.
Good evening. Can you hear me okay?
Might get a little closer to the mic.
Closer?
That's better.
Oh, okay. My name is Greg Wallace. I'm a structural engineer. And per the board's request, we conducted a seismic analysis and review of the community center. As you're probably aware, this building was built in the 50s, before there were seismic codes, seismic provisions in the building code. In the late 80s, there were renovations and additions on the side and the back. It's generally a good building. It's a small building, but as is typical for late 50s buildings, it has a few issues that should be addressed. Most notably, it has to do with the CMU walls. As you're aware, the fault is very close, and the heavy walls generate a large seismic force when the building is shaken. So the main issues, seismic issues that should be addressed to improve the seismic strength of the building is to improve the attachments between the brick walls and the roof of the building. Basically tie the building together better so that when it's shaken it stays as one unit. The rear wood portions of the building are much better because they were done in the 80s and much more to current code standards. The main issue with the building would be the front wall and the side wall, where the walls are only partial height, which when they are shaken, they can move out of plane from the building. And the roof, this roof and the roof of the side building, the side meeting room, is supported on those walls. So that would be the main thing that should be improved.
Mr. Wallace, would you mind pointing out exactly what walls you're talking about?
Oh, okay, all right.
Do you want a microphone that you can stand up with?
Well, it's, am I drifting in and out? Is that?
Perhaps you'd be more comfortable.
Yeah, this is kind of, the most problematic wall is the front wall, because this roof is supported, each joist is supported on a post that sits on top of this wall, which is not laterally braced. So when the earthquake happens, this wall can vibrate in and out of plane and actually can tip away from the building, and since it's providing support for the building, that's not a good thing. The same thing is with the ridge beam in the back. So the main seismic things that need to happen to improve this building up to current standards is to tie the walls to the roof much better and provide support for the roof along this line, where in an earthquake this wall might not provide adequate support for the roof.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Is there any more analysis you need to do, or do you consider your analysis done?
It's pretty much done. We provided the preliminary drawings, which kind of outline the seismic improvements. It would be much better if you kind of incorporated them into architectural issues that you want to do with the building. The previous bond was to open this wall up and provide better access to the grounds out front, which half the cost of doing that would also solve the problem of this cantilevered wall on the front. So part of the seismic stuff could be incorporated into architectural issues that you want to accomplish with the building.
There was testing done, and then Mr. Wallace, in discussion with architect Bart Jones, who has also been very, very generous with his time with our committee, who did the addition in 1988, gave some new drawings to Mr. Wallace on Friday, which then Mr. Wallace wanted some more information, so more testing was done today. We had GPR on almost all the walls, and that report will be incorporated in to verify his numbers in case changes need to be made.
So I'm sorry, who did that testing?
Consolidating testing engineers.
The engineers
I'm sorry. I'm not clear. Is there so this was a new version of the building or just new ideas from Bart Jones?
Bart Jones had some additional drawings from the 50s, is that what I'm right? So
He had some additional information. We had the original drawings that he did in the 80s, and we reviewed those. We did some testing of the rebar to verify what the rebar was, and that indicated that it was only at 4 feet on center, and Bart provided some additional information in his file that indicated that it was actually at 24 inches on center, and then we came back out and re-verified that this morning, actually.
Is that better or worse?
It's still the same. In our assumptions, the walls are partially grouted, meaning they're hollow CMU walls, which means only cells that have rebar in it have grout in it, and the rest of it is hollow. So when we did our analysis, we assumed that they were reinforced at 48, but we assumed that the joints were mortared. Apparently they're stack bond, or dry stack bond. So the fact that it's at 24 inches on center is the same amount of area in the wall as if it was at 48. So I'm probably losing you because it's getting more.
Well, essentially, I think what we determined last night is we were hoping that this building could be an essential services building, possibly when all the seismic was done. We may have to reconsider that and only get to life safety, which would be unfortunate, but it is a consideration because the cost to grout.
Well,
it's not going to happen.
The main issue is that the partially grouted CMU walls are kind of brittle. They're adequate for the seismic strength of this building, but given the fact that the fault is very close and that they're brittle, they will be cracked and there will be damage. And if the difference between life safety is that you want everyone to get out of the building fine, immediate use or essential services means that right after the earthquake, you want to feel comfortable still using the building, and with diagonal cracks in the CMU walls, most people would feel a little bit uncomfortable and using the building in that state. And it also takes out some of the reserve strength of the building, so that if there's an aftershock, it's not as seismically safe.
So I have the $60 million question.
Okay.
Is it worth doing?
Yes.
And is it worth doing with the knowledge that we might want to revamp the way the building looks in some way?
I think it's best to do it in conjunction with that.
Okay, that's what I thought you said.
But still, we're talking about a building that would not collapse in an earthquake, but probably would not be usable after the earthquake. That's kind of what.
In its current state or in
With
a
your
retrofit?
I thought you were saying is that we could expect the building not to fall down, so people get safely out of it, but reusing the building would not be an option without a majorly different approach to stabilizing the building.
There would be damage to the building that would probably make it, certain sections of the building may not be immediately usable right after an earthquake. The meeting rooms are probably okay, but this portion of the building would.
So that's a different issue than doing it in conjunction with architectural changes.
Right, but that would mean that we pay a bunch of money to upgrade it, then there's an earthquake, and we pay a bunch of more money to fix it afterwards.
That's one way to go about it.
Yeah, that's one way to look
Depending on the size
at
of the earthquake and its location on the
No, I
fault,
understand.
and yeah.
Yeah, if it was an earthquake on the San Andreas Fault, it would probably be immediately reusable. If this section that's a couple of blocks or a block and a half away broke, then probably not.
May I ask a question?
Yeah.
What area of the complex is the most stable?
She's getting under that.
I'm going to move the meeting there.
Yeah.
The good
Yeah,
thing
we
about
want to
this
know
buil-
because we want to arrange the seats differently
That's
next time.
If I had my preference, I wouldn't be standing here. If the earthquake happened, I'd be in the meeting rooms or in the back in the kitchen.
Okay.
Okay, note to self.
But what's good about this building is that it's very easy to exit the building. So,
We want to say there's a lot good about the building.
Yeah.
Because the cells were not filled, it's a lighter weight building. So if the cells were filled, it would weigh about 92 pounds per square foot, and partially filled, it's more like 56 pounds. And the amount of retrofit you have to do is directly correlated to the weight of the building. So that's helpful.
well,
Lighter when it falls.
there's nothing out of the ordinary for a building of this age for bringing it up
Okay,
to current
that was my next question. Is
Yeah.
this the worst public building you've ever seen?
Oh, no. It's quite typical for
This
a concrete
generation.
block.
Okay.
If this building was completely wood framed without the concrete block, there would probably be very little to do seismically to improve it. But
Could I make a couple of comments that are
Sure.
related to our committee meeting of the other evening?
Please, yeah. Go to the microphone. This is Peter, and he's on our Park Building Committee.
I've been a little bit the interpreter of the structural content to the rest of the committee. I think maybe as an architect, not exactly a structural engineer, I still know something about what the heck he's talking about. And I think that what we gathered from the meeting the other day was that in an earthquake, as the building it is now, there is a possibility that there could be severe damage to the building. And the most vulnerable part of the building is this wall here, which, because of the way it's built and the way because of its position within the building, if this wall tips over, then the roof comes down. And other parts of the building, there are more walls that meet each other and brace each other and are much less likely to fall down. To repair the building, to get it to the point where, heck, if there's an earthquake, this building is the building that you would come to because it would be so solid that it would just stay, would be, because of its basic masonry construction, would be difficult and expensive to do. But there are measures that could be taken to improve the building so that in an earthquake it would be unlikely that the damage would be such that if there were a meeting in this room there would be deaths or something. I mean, or all our Boy Scouts or Cub Scouts would be in danger, but people could get out of the building because it would stand up well enough to do that, although the structural damage to the building might be significant enough that to occupy it further or to bring it back to usable shape might be difficult and expensive. There are kind of obstacles to improving the building and making changes to it functionally and aesthetically, but there are also opportunities, because if this wall, for example, is one of our liabilities, one of the things that we learned from the meeting was that if we took this wall down and replaced it with a different kind of structure, we could make the safety of this room greater and provide different possibilities for what kind of a wall this would be. It could be more open, have more doors or windows or something, or not. I think the upshot of it is that it would be difficult to turn this into a building which would be the community resource for safety and the place where people would come when all the other buildings that they were escaping from had fallen down, but that we can make significant improvements, and in the process we can make changes to the building that would be that would have other advantages as well. And included in that, of course, are the accessibility things which have to be figured into the process as well. Those, I don't think, are going to turn out to involve significant structural changes.
So Peter, let me ask you a question. When you say it would be difficult to make this basically an essential, whatever you call it, the building you come to when everything else falls down, what does that mean?
It's more difficult, yeah, because of the hollow.
So difficult means more money, or that's just too much to take on?
Well, masonry is lousy in earthquakes, and the DSA, which is in charge of approving school construction, will not allow unreinforced masonry in any school buildings. And this is reinforced masonry, but it's perhaps not as reinforced as we think. We're going to do additional testing, correct? We did. And what do we got? Do we got the 2-foot spacing, or?
It's 2-foot spacing, but as far as horizontal spacing,
To add that kind of structure to the existing masonry would be a real project.
Thank you. And thank you for your clear explanation.
So is there a seismic threshold if we encounter a 4.0 earthquake? I mean, when do you start to get worried for this?
When do I start to get worried?
You
worries all the time.
I know. Okay.
No, that's
No,
fine.
you hear on the news it was a 5.1. Do you think
5.1 would not.
I wonder if that building made it.
No.
Okay.
5.1 would, even if it was on the Hayward Fault, it would probably not be an issue for this building. But if it's Loma Prieta, which was a 6.9, 150 miles away, not a problem. If it's a block away, it's a problem. So.
Okay.
But in general, if you're doing seismic work, if you can do it in conjunction with architectural things that you want to achieve, it's much more cost effective. And one of the things about doing the seismic strengthening would also involve in the roof. You can do improved connections from below, but you're going to see them. Whereas if you re-roof the building, you can do them from above, and then they don't affect the architecture of the building. You could also insulate the roof at that time, which might help with energy if you opened up this wall and made it more glass.
What if we put solar panels on the roof? Would that be worthwhile?
Solar panels, the electric one, photovoltaic, they're not a problem for a roof like this because they're very light. So.
We just want to estimate, I believe, have an estimate of our power bills versus cost for solar panels.
We might want to, just think we might want to consider that.
Yeah, but they wouldn't, the roof is strong enough to put panels on it.
So is there anything more you want to do with this discussion, Rochelle, or?
No, unless if there's no further questions. Mr. Wallace gave us a general ballpark estimate after consulting with a contractor of around $300,000 plus, should we just re-roofing the building at $50,000? If we choose not to re-roof the building, there's some, that cost can be less, clearly. Go ahead.
Question. Really quickly, your estimate for $300,000 and $50,000 for the roof dealt with a specific set of design parameters. For example, this whole wall here, you wouldn't do anything except put steel columns floor to ceiling.
Right.
Okay, so the $350,000 number is a little bit conservative because if we're talking about redoing that wall, architectural plans for a different type of wall would be on top of that, and the cost of constructing a different type of wall would be over and above $350,000. Is that what you said on Monday night?
The structural cost would remain the same.
Right. But I'm talking about the design detail. For example, if you did want to put in a row of doors that opened across that wall, that is not within the $300,000, is it?
No. You mean the architectural cost of the doors? No, that's not in there. But the structural cost, you could either add columns under each.
The reason I ask that is because, I mean, we're trying to figure out, this is great report, what do we do with it now? And I don't know what your committee wants to do with it, but I'd be interested to see what kind of alternatives we have to changing some of the aesthetics at the same time accomplishing the structural repairs that you deem necessary, and what that would look like. And I just throw that out, so it'd be nice to get some numbers for that. Okay. And of course, we still have your issue about accessibility and the experts' report on that, which I guess we'll see next time.
I'm hoping so, yes.
But we recognize you're the structural engineer, not the architect.
Yes.
And there's a difference. Thank you.
There's a difference, yeah.
So then, so just to sort of see where this goes, next time we get a report on the ADA issues, somebody has to synthesize the ADA with this.
Yes, that's what the committee will be looking for, and coming probably forward with a proposal that we have someone that marries all these different reports together, and we have a discussion about,
and that would be an architect, most likely?
Yes.
A design team.
Also, have you contemplated the WW money into any of this?
Yes, WW is on our agenda, and we are focused very hard on making sure that our grant proposal goes in the spring of 2016. We must make the March 31st deadline in order to be considered in 2016. Otherwise, we're waiting a whole year. So we are on track to put in something by that time.
And our WW deadline is when? We have to use it by.
The grant proposal is the grant proposal is acceptable in a window of February 1st to March 31st every year. So we're looking to make the 2016 deadline because we must have the entirety of the project completed by December 31st, 2018.
That's the date I wanted.
That's the date.
Yeah.
Quick question about the roof is also sitting on that wall, which is also lightly reinforced, but has a little bit of help from additional some things. But that kind of looks like it could also be. Yeah, it looks well. It's bigger. It's higher. So.
Well, this wall is cantilevered vertically off of the ground, and there's nothing, and the posts sit on top of it. That wall back there has a low roof behind it that in the 80s they did add some ties, so it's braced to the lower roof that's behind over the kitchen and the storage rooms. Part of the seismic upgrade outlined in the drawings we prepared is to improve those connections because
but in effect, you have a smaller box stacked behind a larger box, which is holding it up.
Yeah, yeah, and those those walls go full height from a roof down to the floor, so they're they're braced at both their top and the bottom, whereas this is only braced at the bottom.
Just as a point of reference, has it ever been looked at what it would cost to just tear the thing down and build a new one?
Yes, we did look at that.
What are we talking about?
$2.5 to $5 million.
2.5 to 5?
Yeah, starting all over from scratch.
Right.
This is one of the things the Measure L campaign went through, and there's a whole online report about all the various costs to repair, replace, demolish, you name
Okay.
it. And if you haven't seen it, it is on the district website, and the Mueller-Caulfield people did it in 2012, I believe, 2013. It's very exhaustive, and it has bid prices for everything, including
Okay.
a complete demolishing and renovation.
Right, it just seems silly to spend maybe $500,000 and have it still look like this.
Don't disagree.
Look at that.
A lot of people agreed with that.
I see
Okay,
a
I
coffee
think,
date.
on that note, I think we're finished with this agenda item.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thanks. And Rochelle, thank you very much for organizing this.
Mr. President,
Okay.
if I can ask the board to consider now taking 8C. Adam Benson is on the clock.
Oh,
I know,
okay.
I know we still have the calendar to approve,
Yep,
but
yep, let's take 8C.
Okay. Where am I here? There's that.
You're up.
trying to find my spot. I'm sorry. Okay, so just real quick, there was a motion, we had a October 31st meeting of the Finance Committee, and there was a motion that was made to update the 5-year plan that I believe that Adam had some work to do on the last 5-year plan, along with our accountant, and just Adam's here to try to answer any questions if necessary, but it's a recommendation to the full board that we kind of ask for the assistance of Debbie and Adam to facilitate a 5-year plan for forecasting for finances. So I felt it would be not only timely based on the other discussions we've had so far, but I just want that kind of approval in the discussion.
Yeah, I think also incorporating the information we just had, when we last looked at your 5-year plan, we were working off of some preliminary estimates that we had done. This would certainly be better to incorporate into the actual budget model. And certainly, you know, the labor contract is still open, still out there. That's the one big unknown item, which will certainly have an impact on the forecast. So to the extent that you want to try to capture that data, you know, certainly we could discuss timing of getting this report actually completed.
So I'm just looking for direction from the board with approval to move forward on an evaluation and facilitation of a 5-year plan forecast.
Quickly, what kind of costs are we looking at to do it with Adam's help and Deborah's help together?
That's a great question. I don't expect it to be overly expensive. I know that's a vague statement, but
Yeah, you know, I think the last iteration was under $5,000 for the budget model. Now that the structure is complete, I wouldn't expect it to be even that costly. You know, my part, Debbie
Sure.
certainly has her own contract that I'm not involved in.
Yeah, but we have a 5-year plan now, but it's obviously a couple years in the rears now, and just to update that should be under the limit of $5,000 that I can approve internally.
Even though it's under the limit, I cannot ask enough that every item you bring that has any fiscal impact, I need an estimate, particularly when it comes to consultants, just so people can see how we're spending their money. And I'll support this in general, but, you know, Adam's very, very talented, and I know we're getting a deal, but not always. So I want to make sure that he's worth every dime.
Thank you.
But I want to see what that is, so I have an expectation, and I want to make sure we don't exceed that, and I want to ensure that the public knows what we're doing. And that also applies to Ms. Russell. And I have one concern about her participation. And I've heard you repeatedly tell me directly that, and the public, that Ms. Russell is part-time, she has other clients, she's not always available, so I'm wondering if you've contemplated how this project will impact her, and I thought of that in a cost context, so.
I don't believe there'll be an impact. I think she can manage it. She certainly does have other clients. She certainly works for part-time for us, all right, on an hourly basis. But I do not anticipate this to be a problem for her.
So what are you looking for from us?
Just a confirmation and understanding that there will be some costs associated with the time element from both from Adam's perspective as well as from Deborah, and the agreement that we want to move forward on getting it updated on the 5-year plan forecast.
Do we need a motion or something?
We do need a motion. I'm going to do this, but it will be with a friendly amendment that it is not to exceed $5,000, and if it does, I would like you to come back to the board and ask for more money and break it out for us. But I need a fiscal impact on every item that involves us approving the use of a consultant. It's just easier for everyone. Just sure. Have that out before. And
absolutely. So if the motion included not to exceed $5,000, all right, in order
without further board discussion and approval.
Yes, I'll do this. And
I'll second it.
Okay.
The motion is to move forward with this 5-year projection and hire.
Oh, yes, public comment.
Yeah, let's get the motion out there, though, that you're making.
We should hear public comment before it's approved.
This has to do with your motion.
No, he just
at the finance committee.
So wait 1 second, Jim. We just need to get the motion stated clearly.
Yeah, so the motion is to proceed forward with the 5-year projection, hiring Adam and Debbie as necessary to do so, with the caveat that if that it's a not to exceed $5,000 project, and if it turns out that it will, then we need a report back to the board before going beyond that amount to explain how much more we're going beyond that amount and get our approval.
I seconded that.
Okay, so please comment.
Yes, I just wanted to point out that at the Finance Committee, there was an addition to this 5-year projection that I made the motion on, and I don't see that referenced here, that in fact we would ask Adam if he would also run 2 separate scenarios.
Oh, that's correct.
Showing what might happen if in fact CalPERS does not hit their 7.5% target, which is what they use for purposes of calculating our contribution levels for our police pensions and healthcare costs. So the agreement on that motion passed, and that motion said that we would ask Adam to do that.
Well, we'd recommend to the board that
we recommend to the board that Adam do that. But I don't see that in here. I just want to point out
good point.
That should be part of his work. That's all.
So can we? Would it be?
I can include that type
Another
of
little pet peeve, just scope of work, so I understand what I'm voting on.
Well, could we just
Go ahead.
get this clear with him? So what Mr. Watt is asking for, and I think it's a wise thing to ask for, is a sort of a 2-scenario projection. One would be, I guess, with the standard estimate as we have out now on where CalPERS is going, and then perhaps a more sort of worst-case estimate, something like that. Is that kind of what you were thinking? No, there were only 2 scenarios that we were talking about. I mean that.
There were 3 scenarios: 7.5, 5.5, and I think 3.
But the way it ended was, I said it should be 7.5, 6.5, 5.5, and Mr. Rose made a comment that we would have Adam decide what the appropriate scenario is.
Yeah,
Do
but
we really have to specify this in the motion? I mean, can't this be?
Understood.
It just feels like we're getting into a lot of detail. It's going to be on graphic.
well, it may impact the cost. I mean, if he's
Well,
got to...
the budget model that I'll construct will actually include a scenario feature where you can plug in changes to different growth rates. So you can really plug in any number you want. I'll give you a couple scenarios to consider based on my understanding of their flexible glide path. So CalPERS recently did actually implement a plan to reduce the discount rate
To 6.5, is that correct?
based on annual returns. So it's linked to them exceeding the 7.5% rate. And when it goes up, I think by 4%, they're willing to drop it by 5 basis points. So very incremental changes. So you won't have changes in, you won't see cost increases due to this, but in a year where you might not see as much of an increase because the investment return rate is really high, your rate will just not go down as much as it would have otherwise. It's kind of a confusing
Shock absorber effect.
Yeah, yeah. But certainly I can put those in within that cost, and the features will be there for the chief to play around
Okay,
with.
that's good enough for me without messing up the motion, so.
Okay.
And does that satisfy your concerns, Mr. Watt? All right, so we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you, Adam.
Thank you.
Thank you, directors.
Now, we go all the way back to almost the beginning. I think we're at the consent calendar stage now. So does anybody have any items they want to comment on or remove from the consent calendar? Mr. Kruger.
Oh.
On B, okay.
I would like to remove item D from the consent calendar.
Item, which one, I'm sorry? D.
For clarity, can we use the term pool for more clarification versus removing?
Yeah,
Yes,
you're okay.
I would like to pull
Well,
item
remove
D.
until clarified, but yeah, okay, clarified.
If you're pulling stuff, I'd like to pull item A.
So
And item A. So we have A, B, and D. Any other items people want to clarify or discuss?
Yeah, who pulled A?
I did.
Okay.
Okay, we'll go in order of the items. So what? Chuck, why don't you go first? What do you want to do to item
Quickly,
A?
it's not so much that I want to go over the minutes, it's just that there's a lot of issues in the minutes that we had promised to carry forward with action items that seem to have stopped. So my only request to the chief and to his staff is you go back over those minutes, look at some of the things where we say we're going to pick them back up again, and see if we can get those back into the agenda pool. For example, the notion of action minutes and how we deal with that. We were going to have something coming up, it's not in there. There's some other things, and I don't want to go over them because it is getting late and we're losing our audience. Oh, wait a minute, let me think about this. Anyway, if you would just go back over the minutes with a fine tooth comb and look at the things that we left hanging fire that need attention.
And the minutes weren't coming back to the board until we clarified the issue relative to the audio. All right, that was expressed by members of the community.
Okay, that was one of my
That's why
I'm not gonna...
that has not come back, and that will not come back until we get that problem rectified.
All right, next item was item B. That was per Mr. Kruger.
Are we going in order?
Yeah.
I pulled C.
No, B.
Oh, no, you didn't.
Oh, I thought he said B.
B is in boy, right?
Okay, you notice it didn't take a lot. All I had to do was start speaking and people were leaving.
Don't take it personally.
Chief, I appreciate your comments that you put in there, all 9 of them. I don't think I made myself clear. I thought you would comment on the items that were in this month's operating statement. See, what you did is you commented on the items that we asked about last month. And there was nothing wrong with the comments except they were a month late.
Right.
Now, if you look at today's statement, for instance, and you look at 840, now we have a budget, it's accounting. We have a budget of $30,000 for the year, and the budget year-to-date is $8,000, and we spend a little more than $21,000. Now, that should have had a comment that said, we prepaid, and at the end of the year, we expect to be on budget, or we had something unusual happen. but it ought to go with the statement that's being put out. I don't think I made that clear before, or whatever, I'm not sure. But you know what I'm talking about?
I do.
Okay.
All right, we do, and we're working towards that.
Okay.
We are.
So it's doable.
Yes.
Okay.
All right, because there's ones that I want to make comment on, all right, that were from previous months, all right?
Okay.
And then the current month, and we're working towards that
All right.
avenue.
And then I'm interested in why we spent $21,000 on accounting when we should have spent $8,000.
Okay. So that'll be one we'll bring back, all right?
I'll be looking for it.
Okay, I have no doubt.
All right, anything more on item B?
Yeah. Is this, are you on?
Item B still.
Yeah, we're,
Item B?
yeah, is that what you?
Yes, I'm just going to ask this question. Hopefully it can be explained, not now, but in the next month's budget discussion. I'm attending this Citizens Academy and talking with the police, and of course I know because I was at a finance meeting a year ago that a police officer on a very rainy night broke his ankle, and he has been off on medical disability ever since. What I heard last night was it looks like he may be going back in for another operation. I also understand that there are 2 other officers that are on limited duty because of some medical issues. And where I'm going with this is that all of this affects workers' comp. I don't know how the workers' comp is set up here. I assume that you buy a policy for workers' comp, and I would guess that maybe the cost of that policy is $50,000, because when we're looking at our 5-year budget forecasts, I always see $50,000 thrown in year after year for the workers' comp costs. But we have a situation now where we have 3 people that are probably getting workers' comp claims in. And so I would like, not now, but possibly in a written format coming back, some explanation as to what you anticipate will be the costs of some of these potential claims that are coming in here. I'm talking with people much more knowledgeable about this than I. The issue of workers' comp can be an extremely expensive proposition, especially if you're self-insuring. Now, I understand that we have a policy here. Nevertheless, what I'm looking at is that year to date, we have spent $44,000 in workers' comp, and that's through October, and we have to go until the end of June. And at the end of June, we're supposed to be at $50,000. So we spent 44, and we're going to be at 50. So maybe maybe Lynn would like to explain. But I'm concerned with the 3 people that we have here that workers' comp could somehow come back and really add to our budget. So I'd just like an explanation, doesn't have to be now, as to how that whole thing works.
I cannot answer the question about the future. I can answer the question about the past, and our workers' comp insurance premium is paid essentially once a year, and then later in the year there's a catch-up in case there's any sort of reconciliation.
I think Jim's question goes to the notion that if we have 3 people on workers' comp, it's going to affect the premium we pay, and what's called the mod, which in effect is how much you have to
the experience modification rate.
Correct. I'm thinking it's going to be a little bit like my my automobile insurance policy. I have an accident. Guess what? Next year I'm going to be paying some more. And we have 3 people now on workers' comp, one with a very serious injury. By the way, I would like to know whether or not you have worked out an agreement with that individual as to whether or not, he's coming back on duty on a limited capacity, or if he's going off completely. These are things that I know need to be worked on, and these things certainly will affect your premiums going forward.
All right, can we maybe next meeting get a report?
Well, some of the information that Mr. Watt is asking is personnel related.
Let me finish, please, will you? Next meeting, let's get a report to the extent we can provide the detail he's looking for without violating somebody's privacy. Let's do that, okay?
Absolutely.
Oh, that'd be great.
Well,
Thank you.
Just to be clear, you have to have workers' comp insurance. So, I mean, the fact that there are 3 people out on workers' comp is uncontrollable, right? If you're saying we need to budget for the fact that our
That's what I'm
premium may
talking
go up, okay.
That's
Yeah,
what I'm talking about. I'd like
it's
to know
premium.
what-
We have, you can be self-insured, but we're not, fortunately.
Thank God.
Yes.
Okay,
A very, very minor thing, item 643, the janitorial supplies. We've exceeded our annual budget, and I'm just wondering if we need to expand that category if we've been underestimating. So just something to consider, nothing to.
All right, so that's just a comment to the chief, correct? Okay. All right, so we're done with B. Anything on C? I think, Vanessa, you wanted to say something about item C?
Yeah, I pulled C, which is this variance report, which is not something I was expecting. Can you just tell me what I'm looking at here? The accounts that you've enumerated, that's really helpful. It would also be helpful to tell me what I'm looking at so I don't have to look at this thing. Can you just walk me through how you, why you identified these specific accounts, for instance, and how you're tracking this monthly on your own?
Before he does that, I move to extend the meeting until we finish.
Yeah, I'll second the motion. It's about that time. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. We're meeting until we drop.
Can we take a 2-minute break? Is that all?
Sure, let's do that. Let's take a 2-minute break.
I'm in the middle of an item.
Yes, go ahead, I mean, after.
All right.
Finish
right.
Okay, with the general manager's authorization, I prepared the variance report. I went through the profit and loss report, identified things that stood out to me, identified things that had been pointed out by directors at the prior meeting, and tried to address concerns that had been raised, in particular raised about 521, and then tried also to identify other line items that stood out as being unusual relative to what had been budgeted either for the month or budgeted year-to-date, and to provide an explanation for the variances.
Yeah, this is something Mr. Kruger has asked for a couple meetings now. And so this was our first attempt to, without waiting for questions, how come the item on the budget varied from what the actual cost was, when it's too far out of whack, provide the explanation in advance.
And I appreciate the summary as a support document, but I go back to the column. It would actually be really nice to this has to be a push of a button, and maybe, General Manager, we can make a time to discuss this further so we don't bore everyone here, but if you could find time on your calendar this week.
Always.
Thank you.
Now we get 2 minutes?
Yeah.
Yes.
Now we get 2 minutes.
So are we?
We're breaking for 2 minutes.
Okay, are we done with the consent
Finished with
calendar?
item C, right?
We're done with C, unless the
one more
public
item
has
to go.
questions.
You want to finish the consent calendar first?
Yeah, could we?
Yes.
All right.
Okay, so my question is on page 27, in reference to the Park and Rec Administrator. I'm just wondering about the breakout of when Ms. DiNapoli is doing other work, whether we have a separation of her duties in terms of if she's doing any responsibilities within the police department, do we budget and put those hours in that category? And when she's working on Park and Rec administration, or do all her hours currently still fall under Park and Rec?
75% of her hours are allocated to administration and 25% to park.
Okay.
Is that it?
Yes.
Okay, now let's take our 2-minute break.
Well, can we?
Can we move? I move that we approve the consent calendar.
Okay.
I second that motion.
Okay, there's been a motion and a second. All in favor? Any discussion first? Chuck?
No, I was going to vote to approve.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes. Now, shall we vote for a 2-minute break?
I move that we recess for 2 minutes.
The hour grows late. Okay, I want to suggest that well, actually, the next item is the zero tolerance policy. So we're on item A of old business. General Manager Chief Hart, would you please brief the board on this?
You bet. So the next item is an item that was originally commissioned in May of 2010 by this board for the University of California, Berkeley Institute of Transportation Studies and Technology to conduct an audit and review of the traffic and issues in Kensington. Subsequent to that study, the board approved what has been known as a zero tolerance policy in town in reference to specifically a couple actual intersections in town. And since I've been here as your general manager and chief of police, it's been a nagging issue from the community that I've been waiting for the opportunity to address. So, although traffic safety is paramount, pedestrian safety is paramount in town, if you look at the overall numbers based on some of the reports that some of the attachments, the zero tolerance policy has not really ever been really enforced. Not that that means anything other than the fact that it's got such a negative connotation to having a zero tolerance, for number one. Number two, I've also been told throughout the community and the number of people that I've talked to that part of this also is that if you're a Kensington resident, you shouldn't be cited.
I like that.
So what I'm trying to do in my overall scheme of plan is to rebuild the trust in the community. We build the trust that the community has in its law enforcement, where if you are a Kensington resident and you deserve a citation, that the officer uses that discretion either way, either to give you a warning or to cite you, and not have a zero tolerance per se on the books, merely just to have a zero tolerance, when in fact we know that it's not followed or as directed by the board. So what I'd like to do is kind of reset the clock a little bit, all right, back up one step, come back to the board in January potentially, all right, with some specific guidelines with regard to that, but at a minimum, not have the zero tolerance be the direction of the board. And I think that it's of value to understand the concept of law enforcement where officers should have the discretion in order to cite or not to cite and not have the board's policy or board's direction in this case. The research have found that for this particular topic was that the board policy in and of itself was never changed. However, the direction from the board was to have a resolution that there will be a zero tolerance. So I think that for my perspective, I think that if we reset the clock, come back to the drawing board with not an issue of zero tolerance on the table, and really talk about public safety and pedestrian safety. There's a lot of programs I think that we could follow, but I think this is one that is bad public policy to have a zero tolerance either for Kensington residents or non-Kensington residents. So I want to try to move forward in a progressive, innovative way for the benefit of the community.
I'd just like to make a comment or two here. I think there is a mountain of misunderstanding even about what the zero tolerance policy is or was meant to be. As I understand it, it was always directed at traffic and pedestrian safety. It was prioritizing enforcement in that area. And it was not zero tolerance in the sense that if any law of any kind is violated, you automatically get a ticket. It was very strict enforcement of hot traffic spots where pedestrian safety is potentially compromised, speeding, that kind of thing, in recognition of, a problem we have still in this community, that people drive way too fast in certain areas of this town, and they do jeopardize pedestrians as well as other drivers. So I don't think it ever had the right name to begin with, and when you're talking about guns in schools, zero tolerance makes a lot of sense.
Sure.
That's what I associate that phrase with. When we're talking about enforcing the laws that apply to everybody, Kensington residents and others alike, if they're within these borders, then I hope what you're thinking about is saying, well, there's certain areas of law we want to emphasize enforcement in. We don't want to take away discretion from the officer, but we certainly want to put a strong emphasis of targeted enforcement, if you will, in certain areas, and that they sort of match the general sentiment of the community that these are the areas that are most problematic and need attention. The other thing I'd like to say is you don't do everything with a stick. If we really are after getting people to slow down and drive more carefully and protect pedestrians, we need some of the things that help to educate people about what they're doing. I think I've mentioned this before, those signs that flash the speed you're driving. I think they're very effective. I mean, every time I see one of those things, I slow down.
Absolutely.
Even those little signs that they have, drive like your kids live here, you've seen those? Well, you know what?
Is drive like your kids.
No, you got to complete the sentence, but it's true. I mean, you drive through someone else's neighborhood and you're not thinking about people living there, and so there's an educational component that goes with the enforcement, and we need to think holistically in that sense.
Since I was probably the only person on the board when this thing was first passed, I just want to tell you it was passed unanimously because traffic was just abominable. I think the reasons for keeping it in place still exist. And I know that I went over to Chris and his wife's house at one point, and I was walking up the street to see what it was like to walk on that street with no sidewalks and cars zooming by you. And it's like a death race. It really is. And I was driving up the street once, and Marina was outside watching me drive up the street, and the car passed me coming uphill towards her house. And I was just shocked. I'm going, why is... You have to do something to really make the point with people that this is a question of public safety. It's not a question of, gee, I live here, I shouldn't get a ticket. It's a question of, if you're driving too fast, you should. I got one more story, then I'll pass the mic along. Chief Harmon used to give me all the phone calls from people complaining about their tickets, so I got a lot of them. And one person called me to complain about getting a ticket for 35 miles an hour in a 25-mile-an-hour school zone. And I said, so what's your point? And she said, I was going safe, and you're going 35 miles an hour in a school zone. What's safe about that? And she said, and you may like this or not, she said, I'm not voting for you again. It's really a question of public safety, and I just think that it's paramount that you do something to make people get the message that this is not their private speedway. It's a place where people live, where kids cross the street, and where public safety is really paramount. If you don't want to call it zero tolerance, I want something as good or better that makes the point that you have to drive carefully and safely.
My point is that message got lost, I got to tell you.
So if I can add one item to the discussion that is on page 79 of the packet, specifically to what Director Toombs is talking about, I did ask the county to perform a study of the speed on Franciscan Way, and as you can see on a couple different days and throughout a certain period of time, the average speed was less than the miles per hour that's posted. And although there may be some spikes, and there are spikes as you can see on the chart, the majority on the average overall was less than 25 miles an hour. So another disadvantage that we have with Franciscan Way is it is difficult to try to run radar on there because we need to get our vehicle in a place that is, although limited, spaced in order to facilitate the radar. However, I think that this chart, and I did talk to the traffic engineer from the county specifically, he believes, I mean, he would be adamantly opposed to any additional traffic measures up at this point in time, because he believes that the study shows that the speed limit on an average is less than what is posted. Because I said, you know, can we drop it down to 20? And he is adamantly opposed to that at this point in time.
I'm not going to put all my eggs in the basket. Again, what was I saying? That is a sample.
Yes.
And I have been on Franciscan Way. I've spoken to neighbors this month, actually, and I'm in full agreement with Chuck on this. And my position has evolved only because, while zero tolerance is probably a bad policy, you don't rescind a policy unless you have a meaningful policy alternative in place already. So I feel there are a lot of options in how we handle traffic, and I want to see that on paper before I pull this, because I've lived on the Arlington, I've backed out and been hit by someone on the Arlington. We have a speeding problem. I don't care what sample we look at. All you have to do is step out, and nobody goes 25 here unless it's on one of the tighter roads. But even down Berkeley Park, I can't believe how fast people go, and and that's not, you know, that's just going to be a problem indefinitely.
And it will be, Director, and I just want to make sure that as a philosophy, that the community, all right, that we have, you know, the significant high importance of public safety and pedestrian safety, but that we do not have a specific zero tolerance on the books, because I believe it's bad policy in and of itself. That doesn't mean that we don't enforce traffic laws. It doesn't mean that we don't run radar.
I'm not saying.
It doesn't mean that we enforce pedestrian safety, but for purposes of perception or title or whatever it is, it's my recommendation that we start over, all right, and we look at traffic calming devices, that we look at warning devices, that we look at additional radar, all right, opportunities. We look at those options so we don't necessarily have this over the head of zero tolerance, and I think it's a policy that I would recommend to the board.
I agree with you, and I agree with Director Toombs. And I don't see, I think there's a combined win here, and I don't see any economy in pushing this or pushing to rescind this now without something meaningful to address traffic in its place. So one idea, and you see this in many communities, and you can talk to Public Works about this, is putting signs where you have zero tolerance traffic zones, which are just smaller signs where people know that on Franciscan Way, you know, there is no educational ticket here. You get ticketed if you're going too fast. We have zones like that on the upper part of Kensington coming down around the College District. Arlington is a problem, near the school is a problem. Luckily, we have an officer stationed there following school hours and before school hours. But what I really like to see is for you to continue this item, and in the meantime, come up with something tangible with regard to traffic that's on paper so the community sort of can absorb it. And so we see we're taking away one policy and we're bringing this alternative, which we think is a better community policing model. And I don't see that element presented here. And until I do, it'll be a no vote. But I think you're on the right track. I don't disagree with your philosophy, but I think Director Toombs and some of the residents make very strong cases for not simply eliminating a policy because it's, you know, bad publicity. I'm done.
Any other comments from board members?
I was going to make, thank you for bringing this to us, first of all, because the information is very interesting and it's quite out of date. I mean, so I'm very interested. I think there's a lot of work for us to do to bring this. One, it's clearly a vital issue for community members because I've heard from a lot of them in the last couple of weeks, and also because it's time to bring some of our data 5 years forward, because I think we have more kids crossing. I've talked to a lot of parents this week about Highland that are really frustrated about the speed that a few folks take flying down Highland, and several of them have offered to let you use their driveways, so, because they're...
And we do,
yeah.
absolutely.
And, but I think that it will be very interesting if we can work together with the community to identify hotspots and new issues, and I understand what you're trying to do, because zero tolerance is an awful name. It doesn't communicate what we're trying to do, which is enforce our traffic laws and slow people down on Sunset and Franciscan and the Arlington, and just kind of wake them up as they're flying down Wellesley. And we've all done it because we're running late, and you know, at the last minute, now that we have more people with earbuds and cell phones, and it's scary.
Yeah, just don't forget Calusa Circle either.
And Calusa Circle. I'm not trying to forget Calusa Circle. I never speed down there, though, Lynn.
Well,
so I never speed anywhere, but I especially, you know,
Never say
semi-Freddy's. I'm driving, you know, I'm so excited to be down there.
So I want to say I agree with the chief on this. I think that the zero tolerance policy needs to go, but I also agree that we have to have something in its place. I actually think enforcement is the answer. And if people know that people get tickets for speeding, then they will stop speeding. So I would love to, I think we should table this until we have some concrete plan from you to say this is what we're going to do, but I truly believe that zero tolerance needs to go as it's currently defined.
Did folks want to?
First, Chuck, thanks again for your help in all the traffic issues. And I remember meeting with you when we were back there, so it's been a while. And I agree with Chuck and Len and Vanessa. I don't see rescinding it until you've got something else making any sense. And I just did some research. That's how I discovered the joys of the scanned PDF. It looks like from March until now there was about 300 traffic stops and 120 tickets given. So zero tolerance policy isn't even being followed right now. I don't know what's being followed. So how could I have confidence that a new policy is going to be followed if even the current one is not being followed? So I'd rather you see try to make it work as what we have now instead of just throwing it away, because it's obviously no one's doing anything that even comes close to zero tolerance. So I'm not sure what they're doing. And
they're using discretion.
Okay, so now let's say that I'm speeding and I get a ticket, and I know there's discretion. I'm going to think, well, why did I get a ticket? Did I say something bad at a meeting? Does the cop not like me? Did my neighbor get a warning because they're friends with a cop? I think discretion opens the door to really a lot of potential trouble. So that's why zero tolerance, even though it might have a bad connotation, at least it's a stated policy. These people know what the rules are. If you have discretion, you don't know what the rules are. Sometimes the cop might be in a bad mood, you get a ticket. He's in a good mood, you don't. I don't think that's any way to run a police department. Part of the zero tolerance, as far as I understood, was in reaction to the fact that it was an unstated policy that Kensington residents wouldn't get tickets no matter what they did. And so a lot of it was clearing that up and letting people know that if you speed, if you do something wrong, you're not going to get a warning just because you're a Kensington resident. And I think that has to stay. I can't see how Kensington residents should be treated any different than anybody else. If you're going 40 and you hit somebody, you're going to kill them whether you're a Kensington resident or not. So no matter what happens, I think it has to be applied equally. And if you have discretion, how are you going to measure that? How are you going to determine that you have a successful discretionary policy? Are you going to audit every stop and say, well, why did you give a ticket? Why didn't you give a ticket? Are you going to have training on this new policy? I see a lot of questions and not many answers. So I think it should stay. I think it should be probably followed instead of not. And that's pretty much.
You make a good point, though, on the perception of selective enforcement. And
So what are you going to do when somebody's driving 2 miles over the speed limit, or 3 miles, or 5, or 6? You got some slide rule or some calculator you're going to use to say they got to get a ticket no matter what, or
That sounds
would
like
it
a question
exercise
for
discretion?
Mr. Chief, not
So-
Mr. Deppie.
Well,
Well, no, it's a rhetorical question for
it's a
everybody.
rhetorical, and I think it's a good one. My understanding is that there is, anything under 5 miles an hour, the courts aren't going to look at. That's sort of been what I've been told. That you get a ticket for 2 miles an hour, and you go fight it, the court's not even going to bother with it.
I think it varies, and I think that's one of the areas where police have to exercise some discretion.
So if there's a discretion about from 0 to 5, that's different than the discretion of, well, you're going 7, but I like you, and you're not going to get a ticket, but you're going 7 over, and I don't like you, so you are going to get a ticket. I think there's two kinds of discretion there. One is, where is the unstated limit? I always figure it's like 5 miles over, personally. That seems to be what police go for. I don't know.
It depends on the jurisdiction.
It depends on the jurisdiction. We used to go to Blackhawk once in a while, and that's like 1 mile over. You go 1 mile over, and you get a ticket in Blackhawk. But everybody knows it. The streets are very safe there.
So let me just say there's discretion and then there's arbitrariness, and I think what you're concerned about is arbitrariness on the part of the police.
Maybe that's one way to put it.
We don't want to have that. I agree with that. But I do think we need some discretion. And if we trust the police force, I understand there are some trust
Well, again,
issues
if
right
you look
now,
at this, it's supposed to be zero tolerance. 120 out of 300, it's not zero tolerance.
Well,
so how can I trust the police if they're not following the stated policy?
Well, that's kind of why I support the chief's proposal here. It's like, why don't we just admit we're not doing it?
Why don't we try to do it?
Well, no. Why don't we put together something we can all agree? I mean, right now, if we rescind it, then he's going to be directing his police to do the enforcement he thinks is appropriate until he gets more specific direction from the board. That's the way I see it. To say that, oh, we don't want to rescind it until we have something to replace it, well, there's nothing in existence. It's just a lie, as far as I can tell.
Well,
Many communities have published traffic protocol, even how residents report a traffic issue to police. I've presented documents to the neighbors I met, and they all think that this would be a good idea for Kensington because this is a persistent issue. So I recognize your points, I do, but I see no benefit in rushing to pull this back, and let's take advantage of a little time and space and to really think this out and revisit this in December, January. I can't support it. I just can't do it.
I do hear your concern, Chris, and this is always my concern. If you don't have zero tolerance, you do have a concern about discrimination.
Mhm.
And I used to say if you were black and you were in Kensington and you were pulled over, you would get a ticket. From living here for 38 years, that was my observation the first few years I lived here. But I also believe that there has to be some discretion allowed. And I do think it's a trust issue because we're trusting our police to enforce the law as they see appropriate in certain circumstances. Now, there may be a way to define certain protocols, Vanessa. I think that's sort of an interesting idea. This is what we expect. And I just think I personally think we can't take it off the books until we know exactly what you're going to replace it with. And you may say it's going to be total discretion, but then I think we need to know that. So to just say we're taking it off the books with nothing to replace it feels a little bit irresponsible to me.
And let me just give you an example. Let's say, you have a traffic calming calendar, and for January you're going to focus on that illegal U-turn with parking in front of the post box in front of the cheese shop, which everyone does. And
You can't make a U-turn there?
you can't park in the handicap or park parallel to the curb, and people do that. Instead of just ticketing folks, a better community policing policy would be to enlist the outlook and let the community know that you're going to be focusing on this area, and these are things you can't do, making a U-turn. And for 2 weeks we'll give you a warning, but after that the ticket is $200, $300, or what have you. It's not recreating the wheel or anything, but it's just letting the community know that we're making an effort to let them know that this is a problem, this is a target or a hot spot, and we need to address it, and we'll be having more of a presence there. That's all I'm asking for, but I'd like to see something.
All of you are describing areas that will be in, part of the plan as I review all those different options. I only presented this without those options because I think in and of itself, the zero tolerance or the title of that or the way that it was rolled out in and of itself is bad policy. Now, there's many, many things that we can do, obviously, with limited resources, but there's still things that we can do, which all of you are describing. All those are typically done most of the time anyway. All right, if you'd like me to identify those, I can. But the only reason why I brought this forward, because I feel very strongly about the perception of a zero tolerance. I feel very strongly about the perception that Kensington residents don't receive citations because they live in Kensington. I want to try to restart and regroup, all right, and start from scratch, and that's why I presented it without having, all right, the additional potential, because we can discuss all those, but then you get into the fine tuning of, well, why do you pick that intersection versus another intersection? I just wanted to present the option for doing away with what I believe is bad public policy based on the perception that moving forward for the department, for the police department to regain the trust within the community.
I think we all support you building that plan. Build it and, create your ideal on paper so we have something to absorb.
Well, we've lived with it for this long, we can wait another month.
Well, I am concerned that we did hire you to do a job, and I understand that you feel constrained, and then we're not letting you do that. So I am very sympathetic that you would like to be able to command your officers and construct your program from the ground up.
Well, maybe
and
what
that
we
we're
need-
kind of asking you to kind of make some kind of bizarre centaur. This is going to be a terrible metaphor. It's late. So we'll just say that when you're kind of asking you to glom these things together. And I don't think we're articulating very well what we're asking you to do.
Maybe what we need to ask you then is, let's assume that we voted to rescind zero tolerance tonight. What would your message be to the officers tomorrow? That's, I think, where the conundrum is.
I think that it's about discretion. It's about public safety and pedestrian safety. It's about focusing on, key areas that we have in this community that are vehicles that are high traveled or streets that are high traveled, and in some cases are traveled at a high rate of speed, more so than others. I certainly understand. I've been on Franciscan a number of times. All right, I'm always watching my speed. I've met, obviously, with residents on Franciscan. I get it. There's a downhill and an uphill slope, as everyone knows. But I think it's about discretion. I think the discussion surrounding 1 mile, 2 mile, 5 mile over the speed limit, it's about making sure that I provide the leadership to the police officers to have discretion based on the circumstances. Even if someone is speeding and they have, maybe their wife is pregnant and going to have a baby. Who knows? There's just options and opportunities as well as ones that are cited. I mean, I think the percentage that Mr. Deppie is citing, all right, although not following the direction of the board, is also showing that there is discretion. So based on the circumstances as a law enforcement officer, if I always felt, and having written many citations myself, if I believe that the violator, all right, will understand the reasons for that stop, make those corrections, all right, in the future, all right, if I felt that, then I usually gave the warning. If I felt that the individual violator, all right, didn't understand the reasons for the stop, didn't understand the concept, and would do it again, then I used my discretion and I cited. And I just want to make sure that we as a police agency deliver fair, equitable citations to everybody, not just Kensington residents, all right, not just non-Kensington residents, I should say, and that we start from scratch. And that's what I was trying to get to. I can bring back a comprehensive plan that eliminates that, but then we're going to be picking and choosing what we kind of want. So that's why I just said, let me just start with a policy that, in light of, since I've been here, is one of, I won't say it's the #1 topic, but it's like #3 or before topic that why do we have zero tolerance, all right, when I get emails and so forth. And all of you have gotten the same thing. So it's just something that I wanted to try to fix for purposes of healing the community when it comes to that portion of the law enforcement functions of the community.
So I'm sorry, Pat, can I just say something? I really disagree with we're not allowing the chief to do his job. I respectfully disagree with that, because there's no reason why these officers cannot undergo training on how to be better community police officers, or be better at community policing, because this sounds like a community policing issue to me, right?
They do receive that training directly.
Right, exactly. So there's nothing preventing you from imparting your philosophy on how to handle, infractions in events.
No, but I'm a little hamstrung because I have a direction of the board that I'm trying to, that I recognize that is not being followed by the agency. And I want to make sure that I, as your chief and general manager, at least brings it to your attention for discussion, all right? That it's a policy and a direction.
So how long does it take? Pat asked a question, what do you tell the officers tomorrow if this is passed? So how long does it take for you to get on paper your ideal community policing model that's not zero tolerance?
I think what he's saying is you're going from one defined policy to another set of defined policies, and that is impractical. That's what I'm hearing from you.
Correct.
Okay.
Well, we're focusing on traffic, though, and I think Mr. Debbie raises questions about what's the speed threshold? How is this? I move we continue this, actually, and I think I understand, and I want to support your effort, but I'm not going to do it. I want to do it down the road when I have some more confidence. I think.
Let me see if anyone seconds it first.
Can I just say one thing, and I'll get away? When you talk about, well, if I think the warning is going to be sufficient, or maybe I think a ticket is better, that's what really starts to worry me, because that gets into mind reading against personal feelings. That's a kind of arbitrariness I think that we can't have at all. And the traffic study actually says that giving a warning really doesn't do any good. The tickets are the only thing that really help. A warning, according to the traffic study that was, set this whole thing off, that giving warnings are just not effective. And so when I hear that, well, if I think he's not going to do it again or she's not going to do it again, I'll give a warning. And other times, if I don't trust them, I'm going to give a ticket. That's arbitrary. That's personal. And I really think that it's no place in policing. So
and that's a great comment, but I will tell you, with 35 years in law enforcement, there are only two things that are absolutes in law enforcement. Other than that, there are two things that are musts, and I think that there's a huge amount of discretion in law enforcement in general. And the two things, all right, I used to teach traffic school, so one of the things that I love asking all the students in traffic school is that, do you have to sign the bottom of the citation?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Well, I won't comment.
There's only two things that are absolute in law enforcement, other than, or for purposes of arrest. One of them is failing to sign the bottom of the citation because it's a promise to appear, not admission of guilt. If you fail or refuse to sign the citation, and in my case, personally, I received a citation back from the violator that was signed by Mickey Mouse. I told that individual to step out of the car, that he was under arrest. The person asked me why, and I said, because I just met Mickey Mouse, all right, at Disneyland, and he was not Mickey Mouse. All right, you must sign the citation. That is an absolute. Other than that, every other discretion for the vehicle code or every other vehicle code violation is at the discretion of the officer. I do not take that as anything other than the officer doing his or her job in providing community service and the protection of the community of having that discretion. And that's why it's vitally important to me. I think it's vitally important to the community.
Well, I think that's why we had zero tolerance come in, because we had this arbitrary application of the law, and it was causing a lot of problems. And so I disagree with you. I think that if you start letting people decide when and where to give tickets, you're going to open the door for all sorts of problems.
But I think
All
what
right,
the point is that that's already happening.
It's already
right?
happening.
It's what you've pointed out. It
And-
already
Can-
is.
can we hear
And
from
that's
some more
another
members
problem,
of
is
the
that
public?
you've
I
been
mean-
on the job for how long and it's still happening? Did you ever think of maybe trying to get the policies that are in place enforced? Why is it now that you're saying, well, I'm just giving up, I can't control my police department?
That's not what I said.
Well, what's going on then?
I won't argue with it.
You know, look, I think you've had your
Okay, I've
say.
had my say, sorry.
Let's hear from some other people.
Hi, my name's Simon Brofman. My concern is, as a pedestrian, and I've raised this issue with you, Chief, we have pedestrian crosswalks that are violated by vehicles, be it speeding or not speeding. And so my concern isn't really speeding. My concern is, how do we make those crosswalks safer, and that those people driving vehicles understand their responsibility when there is a pedestrian in a crosswalk. I've had cars, I walk Lucy every day, and we cross crosswalks. And people honk at us, people speed so they don't have to stop. I don't care if it's zero policy or what, but I think from my perspective, the most important thing is pedestrian safety in those crosswalks. There's children that use it. They're not adequately lit. There's no real warning for the drivers. People coming down the Arlington around sunset, they can't see if a pedestrian is in the crosswalk. The goal from my perspective is safety here, and particularly pedestrian and dog safety. And we need to address these issues, and I understand that part of it deals with the county, but we need to make sure something is done about this before someone gets hurt. Thank you very much.
I think Simon is sucking up to the president because he knows how much the president likes dogs. That's what happened.
I thought the same thing.
Absolutely. That's what he was
Oh,
doing.
man, foul.
Anyway, I don't have any argument with what Simon says, but I don't think that every stop requires a citation. It really does not. All through life, we ask people to do a job, and we give them some leeway in the way they do the job. And I think we, excuse me, I think we also ought to do the same thing with the police. If we have police officers who do not know how to use discretion, then we have the wrong police officer.
Absolutely.
But I agree with you raising the issue. Plus the second thing, I told you a couple of months ago, you know, you're new, I want to give you a shot at doing things, and I want to try to stay off your back. And I like dogs, too.
Dilk. Clearly, the UC study concluded that a zero-tolerance policy is an effective tool for reducing traffic accidents. That was what it was about. The interim GM recommends in his November the 12th memo rescinding the policy primarily for two reasons that are stated. Number one, he believes that there is an adverse, quote, perception of the community that Kensington is only conducting enforcements as a revenue generator. The study addresses this, keep the community informed, and the former GM pointed out at board meetings that Kensington gets only $10 per citation. Thus, it should be understood that this is not a significant revenue source. If not, address this issue. For example, in an Outlook article explaining where the $200 fine goes. Number two, he notes that a more recent analysis, presumably by the Kensington Police, has shown that since zero tolerance was enacted, there have been fewer citations, not more. He did not conclude why this was, maybe due to fewer staff members, but he said, quote, "At a minimum, the policy is not being enforced." There were actually more citations the first year. Perhaps there are few citations now because there are fewer violations now. Maybe that means the policy is working as it was supposed to. Most accidents happen because at least one person violates a safety regulation. What is important is, have there been fewer accidents, in particular serious ones involving bodily injury? From posted police reports, in the 3 years before zero tolerance, there were 19 accidents involving injuries. That's about 6 a year. In the 4 full years since then, there were 11. That's about 3 per year. Possibly a 50% reduction. Possibly it's statistically meaningless. Who knows? But in any case, if there is a stated zero tolerance policy, or let's say a 50% tolerance policy, it should be enforced uniformly and fairly. A particular officer should not to choose a formal complaint from the Kensington citizens about more than 10 illegally cars parked. Probably not even Kensington residents on these, which was restricting emergency access to homes during a September Danny Shear event.
Ms.
And
Delta,
therefore,
I think we need to finish up here, okay? You're taking a long time.
I'm not my 5 minutes yet.
You're way past 5 minutes.
No, I'm not. This was 3.5. Your watch is wrong. All right, finishing up. And issued neither tickets nor warnings. And then on October, presumably, literally went out of his way to cite somebody for a non-safety issue, like not having a front license plate.
But if we have zero tolerance, wouldn't you have to cite for that?
Yeah, apparently we don't, though.
Yeah, I know. I just think that's the dilemma.
What's selective enforcement? That's
Go on, Mabry.
I can't interrupt the ladies. Mabry Benson here. Mr. Hart, you didn't answer the question about why, 120 citations out of 300 traffic stops? I would be interested in an explanation of why those 180 citations weren't issued for, citations weren't issued for those 180 stops, and I don't know whether you asked the officers, at least, for some of those, can you write down a reason why you didn't issue a citation? I think that would be interesting for the public to know in terms of this whole discussion. Thank you.
Can I state, there might also have been, there's a new no-turn sign for Rincon Road and the Arlington, and I think that there was some discussion with people that went up, reminding people that was now present as a traffic, as a mandate that you, and that was very new to people.
That may be the explanation, but it seems to me 120 out of 300 is nowhere near close to the zero tolerance, and I'm just wondering what the excuse was, or rationale was for the 180.
Might be difficult to find that out, but if you have a way to,
The only thing I would say that the officers are using their discretion, and that's part of the whole issue that we're talking about.
Well, that's right, but they could, Yeah, just another thing to report. Okay, if they recorded that there was a stop, they can write down why I didn't give a ticket.
All right, look, I think there's enough concern, well, no, I don't want, go ahead.
Just a couple items. One, the zero tolerance has to do with more than just speeding, reckless driving, and endangering pedestrians. It appears to have effect on parking, on equipment failures, say a taillight that doesn't work. So there's more to it, and those other things are what people are really upset about, I think. To answer one question about crosswalks, there are these LED lights that can be activated. You'll see them by the BART tracks, and in another neighborhood I know we're having those put in as well. So that is a really good way of indicating to the drivers that there's somebody in the crosswalk. The last thought about speeding, it's something I've seen places, is changing the speed limits to an odd number. 19 miles an hour or 23 miles an hour speed limit. That catches people's eyes and sometimes allows traffic to slow down. Just a couple of thoughts. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I just want to make one comment here. I think that when that zero tolerance policy was first resolved, or the resolution calling for it first came out, I think it was much more clear what was intended by it, that it was not about parking violations or things like that, that it was about hot spots for pedestrian safety and for traffic. And over time, it mutated for lack of messaging, for lack of something. And actually what I see happening here is you saying, let's bring this thing back to square one, and I suspect that what you would advocate would be different in some ways, but would be taking us back to that targeted enforcement concept that I think zero tolerance was originally meant to implement. So I think, like I said, after hearing some counter opinions, we've lived this long with it. I know it's a problem because people are out there thinking there's zero tolerance, and I'm going to get a ticket if I do, if I'm 1 inch into the red curb when I park and stuff like that. But we've lived with that situation for quite some time now, and if we can have a discussion next time around where you can fill in some of the blanks. And to me, the concept, emphasis, we want to emphasize pedestrian safety, we want to emphasize traffic safety. These are the areas of emphasis, and putting some guidelines around the discretionary concept, like, what are some examples of good reasons to exercise discretion? What are examples of bad reasons to exercise discretion? That kind of thing. Maybe that would help us get a little closer to something that, because we do, ultimately, you cannot take discretion away from police officers. Every police force issues warnings, uses discretion. In fact, Kensington is the only place I know of where I have never gotten a warning. I've always gotten a goddamn ticket. So I was never a beneficiary of this preference for Kensington residents. But anyway, if you could, maybe next meeting we could just flesh this out a little bit more so that we're not rescinding something without knowing anything about what we're getting. Does that make sense? So sort of tabling it till next time around, and we'll flesh it out a little bit.
It may not be December, maybe January, but.
Okay. All right, well then, why don't we move on? The hour grows late.
So for the record, we tabled this? Is that
Yes.
what we did?
Yes, we moved it. We had a second to continue the item.
I don't think there was any vote.
I think we did it backwards.
Yeah, okay, I was just trying to move on.
Yeah.
Okay, so I moved to table
You
it
moved
until...
it, and someone seconded, made the second. Was that you, Pat? Yep.
No, I didn't second.
Okay. Maybe, perhaps it was me.
All right, you move it, Vanessa seconds
Okay,
it.
we've already done it. That's
Right.
what we're- Yeah, so we're just taking a vote now to continue
Well,
the item.
do you know what the motion is, Lynn? Do you have it?
Yeah.
Okay. To be taken up either at the December meeting or the January meeting at the chief's discretion. Properly exercised, of course.
Yeah, that's.
All right, so that's the
Oh,
motion.
yeah, this is going to be fun.
Sounds like I have discretion to breathe it.
And you seconded it, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. We're moving on. Our next item is 8A. Will you please brief the board, Chief?
Absolutely. So, in my review of all of the current policies and processes, one of those items are the specific fees that are charged for community services. And in this particular case, you can see the chart that are associated with it. But you can see that in this particular case, we have fees for police records and certain services. Those fees have not been reviewed and or altered since 2001. As my investigation determined that I think that my predecessor wasn't comfortable with bringing it to the board. And I think that I have a responsibility to bring all of these items forward for consideration. So in this particular item, we have a cost comparison for police services. So some of those police services that we provide are like live scan, all right, which is an automated fingerprinting. We also do dry ink for services, and yes, we do get those calls for services. Same thing with vehicle releases that are for vehicles that are towed. Police reports, clearance letters. So if you're applying for a visa or trying to go out of country, you'll need a clearance letter from the local police agency. Same thing with photographs that we may potentially copy. And as you can see the list. So what I am suggesting is that we look at potentially raising those fees to something that is equal to or slightly above the current comparison of other agencies. We pulled Albany, El Cerrito, Richmond, Concord, and Piedmont to give an overview of what those fees were charged, and then we rounded up to the next highest dollar amount. They have not been raised, as I mentioned, in probably about 14, 15 years, or even been reviewed. So I think it was prudent for the board to take a look at this and decide if they are interested in raising these fees to an average amount. If, in fact, the board is interested in doing this, I'll come back next month with an actual resolution that the board will have to adopt if so desired. That completes my report, and I'm open to any questions.
I definitely think that we ought to take a look at this stuff. I have a little problem with 15 cents per page, not to be too picky, but as someone who charges people for that, 15 cents per page seems like a lot for Xeroxing or copying things.
That's actually based on state required. When it comes to police reports, that's actually pursuant to the government code.
But then these other places are doing 10 cents per page. Right? Piedmont's 10 cents per page?
They're breaking the law?
No, they just haven't raised it.
Okay.
Yeah. I actually honed in on that item. I thought it was exorbitant. And the other fees were just out of step. The electronic records fees, I think there are better ways to make information available, particularly information that can be, where text can be copied.
These are mostly reports, Director. These are police reports. We get requests for police reports all the time. If we provide a written copy versus an electronic copy, and that's what the fees are.
Okay, I'll tell you what. Can you give us can you just, by item here, tell me how many we did last year?
How many we did last year?
Yeah, not now, but when you come back, can you provide, did you do 1 live scan last year, or did you do 10?
Well, I can tell you last year we did 0 live scan.
Okay.
And the only reason being is because we're not currently equipped to do that.
Okay.
The live scan machine has been inoperable until I have shown up and we're working on the connectivity. It is currently operational, but we don't have authorization to do anything other than criminals. So in order to do this, it would not be enacted until I can get authorization to do it on the other end from Department of Justice and Contra Costa County, who we have a connection with. But it's still a fee that I want to propose now that we just wouldn't necessarily implement.
So you look at that as revenue generation, basically? Yes. Okay, that's what I'm asking here.
I also think that we have to take into consideration that for our little department, these things are costly because somebody has to do them. So we should charge more than other places for fingerprints, in my opinion. You know, go to El Cerrito if you want to get your fingerprints done. They got 1 million more people than we do. So I personally think that what you've proposed for the most part is pretty good in terms of an increase, and it seems reasonable, and I don't see any reason not to do it, personally.
I could not agree more. So let's take it up for a final reading next meeting.
So,
well, I think we have public comment here.
Oh, sorry.
Gail Feldman. I don't think it's a bad idea to relook at the fees and adjust them as necessary, but I did have one question about the fee for the police reports, and my only concern is that looking at it looked like our fee is higher than a lot of the other jurisdictions, and I mean, for things that are discretionary, like if you're going to get fingerprinted because you have to get a job where it requires you to get fingerprinted, you know, that's kind of like a discretionary thing on your part. But for a police report where you've been victimized by a crime, like somebody's broke into your house, you've had the police come out, you need the report for your insurance, I just don't think we should charge that much for it unless there's really a justification, like it's really actually, I mean, you haven't done the cost analysis, the time study to really figure out that it costs you that much. And if the other jurisdictions are all doing it for, you know, somewhere in the ballpark of $10 to $15 or something, it just seems like we should try to keep that one to a minimum. I don't know how many you do, but I mean, it's the same thing with the zero tolerance policy in a certain way. It's like if you're trying to breed some goodwill somewhere along the line, the place not to get people is like when they've just been victimized.
Right. I would anticipate, it's a great question, a great point. I would anticipate all the other cities to come in line. I just happen to be reviewing this now. It's current, but at the board's discretion, I can change it back to 10, but it's open for discussion. But and police report fees and costs are one of very few that are of these policies that are specifically regulated by the government code. So we were trying to meet the government code and its escalation of cost of living increases.
Do you have any idea how much?
Ours is certainly higher.
How many of those we copy for people a year, roughly?
We probably get no less than probably a half a dozen requests per week.
Wow.
Of copies of police reports for insurance purposes and so forth. And those are fees, and it takes time to staff time, obviously, as everyone knows, to either make an electronic copy of it and or a hard copy of it.
But you don't get your police report until after the investigation's been closed.
Correct.
So.
Still takes time to copy it and to make an electronic file.
But the DA sends that to you. If you're burglarized and the police report's completed, and that's how it happened with me. I didn't get my police report from you. I was told to wait for the DA to send it to me, and that's how I got mine. Because you're a victim, and they offer you victim assistance for retribution, or not retribution, for, you know, yeah, from the criminal.
I'm not sure what the question was relative to that. I'm sorry.
You know, the question is, you know, there are other ways to get this information. That's what I'm trying to ask here. You asked, you know, you can go to El Cerrito. I asked, is this a revenue generator, or do you get, you know, or do you anticipate carrying live scan for other agencies, or, you know, I'm just trying to figure out, you know, Richmond has a high volume of things they process. So I imagine it's a lower cost to them, and they probably have a clerk that's designated for that function. That's to Pat's point. That's to Pat's point, right? That how many do we do? So I'm just wondering. I mean, you can provide that information to me offline. I don't care, but I want to see how many we did of all these items. What you generated last year.
Okay, we can try to get that for you.
I would like to follow up with. So fingerprinting, while it can be for a job, it also is a requirement if you volunteer at the school, and so I'm wondering. I'll find out, but whether or not. That we have to go through LifeScan, because I realize that that's a considerable expense, because when I was fingerprinted, years ago it was ink, and then
For schools, you have to do live scan.
you have to do live
You
scan
have
now.
to do live scan.
Okay.
But this,
Yeah.
but the
And-
interesting part is that the individual doesn't pick up the tab. If you're volunteering, usually that entity will pay for it.
No, they have, West Contra Costa has special days.
Alameda, that's how they do
But they
it.
have only so many spots on those special days.
I was a reading volunteer in Alameda County, and that agency picked it up. so-
I just want to say one thing about this, because honestly, I don't care how they do it in the different counties. But I feel like we have to give the chief some leeway here. And asking him to detail every single decision he makes by showing us numbers, to me, this is, I trust his judgment that if he thinks we ought to raise the price to $50, for the most part, we can raise the price to $50. I mean, I just don't think having him spend his time counting how many police reports he got seems like a little bit of micromanagement to me.
I'm just wondering, how many do you do? I mean, that's why I asked LiveScan. I didn't know we did that. I mean, here we don't.
Does it make a difference?
Well, we haven't even, the number seems arbitrary to me. I'm sorry, I'm just asking that there's a time studying that we quantify the number somehow. I mean, are we doing 10 or 20? I mean,
Well, the live scan is.
not that, I'm not asking you, I'm just, you know.
Are the
I think it's a fair
photographs-
question.
Could you, photographs, you said, are for, like, in accordance with a clearance letter, or those,
They could be, or they could be copies of the police report,
with the police report?
in conjunction with the police report.
Okay. Yeah,
So-
I do agree with Ms. Feldman a little bit that, I don't know if we do, your first burglary is on us. No, I mean, to be horrible. I mean, because you're clearly getting, but I'm just a little worried about, people feeling, I mean, if they're coming back multiple times, or, I've lost that copy or whatever, but I'm a little concerned just about those two particular categories.
I agree with you.
So I guess we're leaving it to you to bring back a resolution for the next meeting with your proposed numbers, and then we just go with that.
Celia, we'll let Celia comment. She wanted to say something.
I have a neighbor whose car was hit as she was backing out of the driveway, and she was promised by the officer who came that she would get the police report. She needed it, I presume, for insurance purposes. She didn't get it, and she, in fact, had to go back to the station 3 times before she got it. Okay? And when she got it, it turns out that it was incorrect, and it was the wrong fender that was marked. Okay. For you to charge this woman $20 for getting this, having that she had to come back 3 times, I mean, this is punitive.
So she gets a refund.
And thank you.
And if I
And
hadn't said it, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry. And from my point of view, when I have asked for PRA requests and I am being charged for it, I understand you need to charge somebody, but this is really a disincentive, I think, for anybody who is going to want to ask for records. We're asking for records because we need information to document something.
As to the PRA, there is actually a state law that says we can't charge any more than it actually costs to prepare the record.
It doesn't cost you
There's
15.
already a coverage there that caps any PRA request documentation. We just can't charge any more than it actually costs.
But
If
I
it's
think-
a dime a page, it's a dime a page.
But that's not what we would charge. I was charged 15 cents a page.
The dime a page is purely for, as an
Yeah.
example,
I'm
whatever
just-
the cost per copy.
It doesn't cost 15 cents to copy a page.
You should look at our budget for the copier. That's actually how we pay for the copier, is by the number of copies we do. There is actually a meter that meters the number of copies. Black and white, color, whatever, we pay by the copy. So, but the point is, we can't charge you more than what state law allows.
All right, well, she was not just talking about PRA requests. She's talking about other
All
stuff,
of
too.
it.
So
I mean, when we got a new copier and whatever, there was somebody here who told us how much it costs and the benefits of switching from one thing to another. I think the cost was something like 6 or 7 cents a page.
That's just the click charge. It does not take into account ink or
Maintenance.
toner or the individual pressing the button. and the paper.
I've made my comment, you've heard me.
Okay.
So just for clarity, I have not heard a consensus that any of the specific numerical numbers will be changed. So what I'll bring back, unless I'm wrong, that's why I'm clarifying, I'll bring back a resolution next month for purposes of approval of raising the fees based on my recommendation of proposed. Is that
I really wish you would consider reducing the fee for police reports.
You'll have a chance to make that point when he brings the resolution back. I mean, what we're asking you now is, thanks for the survey, bring us back the resolution to pick apart again.
And I think you should take into consideration the comments that have been made today. And
Yeah,
that may
maybe you'll
cause
wanna
you
make
to
some
revise
changes.
some of your numbers.
Okay.
Think about it, yeah. All right, so do we need to vote for that?
I think so.
Okay,
No,
good.
just- I want to come
Board direction.
All right, we have one item left on the agenda, and Rochelle, you were
I'm just
asking that-
hoping to table this until next time, so that we
Yes.
can get some clarity. And I mean, it's really, I'm not disagreeing with the concept or anything yet, or at all. We've discussed it, and I think this is where we need to go. But I think that we'll have more time for a faster and more fruitful discussion next month.
I'll go with that suggestion myself. What do you folks think?
I agree with you completely.
Continuing it?
Yeah, till next
Yes,
meeting.
let's do that.
Okay?
In the meantime, it's just a casual, informal suggestion, but it'd be nice to bring back information like, such as, who did you speak with in the K groups who use this? Have you talked to the PTA about the fees for use of this building?
About the fees?
Yeah, have you done any, when you come back, I just want an update. Have you done any outreach to the groups who would be most impacted by a fee increase to this facility?
Oh, so these fees that are proposed are actually only for the rental, for a party, or it's not about K groups
It's not,
or
the K groups are not included at this point.
individual groups. This is only, you are planning to have a bat mitzvah, a wedding.
How about the sixth grade graduation?
A 50th, no, that's
That's
a K group.
Okay.
So this is just outside, essentially.
Yes.
Okay, so we'll hear from you next meeting on that one, okay?
Yes.
Okay.
I move we adjourn.
I second the motion. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Well, unanimously, we agree, we're done.
I'm thinking about it.